Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 4 of What If Naruto Was in Game of Thrones. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. The Iron Islands beckoned. Naruto took no pleasure in the assault that was to come, if only because he knew there would be casualties. Men would lose their lives. Good men, honorable men, from both the north and the west alike. There would be deaths. There could be no avoiding that. For all his skills in healing, he couldn't be everywhere at once. He could come close, sure, but he wasn't perfect. Even he couldn't cure death. Worse, the Ironborn knew they were coming. No avoiding that either, given that they'd all but thrown them back into the sea. They had to know what was coming for them by now. Even a blind man could see the writing on the wall. They'd likely fortified themselves and dug in for a costly siege. Alas, the dragons weren't ready for combat. Well, Kurama might manage a flight with him through sheer dogged determination if nothing else, but Shukaku and Matabi were still woefully small given how recently they'd hatched. He gave them chakra every day to speed along their growth, but there could be no denying the former fox was growing the quickest out of all of them. Perhaps it had something to do with their bond. Or maybe dragons just thrived during war. Who could say? Regardless, they couldn't afford to reveal them just yet, not with so much on the line. He soon found himself faced with another surprise. Tywin was staying behind. You want me to lead the assault? I do. His father remained implacable as ever where he stood behind the table, much to his chagrin. You've proven yourself in battle and the men trust you. This will be your first military command without my guidance. I trust you won't disappoint me. This was to be their final strategy session before he set out, then. Sure, Griot, no pressure. Gulp. Who knows? The elder Lannister loosed a harrowing chuckle. If you acquit yourself well, the bards may have a new song or two by the end of this campaign. No, thank you. The reigns of Castamere was quite enough. They didn't need a new song. The Greyjoys will know you're coming. His lord father laid a hand against the map, indicating a series of marked positions, forcing him to follow his gaze. I expect they will have fortified Old Wick and Pike against us by now. It will be a hard-fought battle, on land and sea alike. But we have gained new allies of our own. He traced a stern finger past the Iron Islands, tracing the edge of the bay itself. The Greyjoys are alone, with few allies. Moreover, they've irked both the Harlaws and the Mallisters with their incessant warmongering. I expect both will be glad to be rid of them, given the right leverage. A blonde brow quirked. Leverage you've already applied, no doubt. I may have written a few letters. The other rose to join it. What did you offer them? Tywin stared stoically. Victory. What else? Damn, Dad was scary. Great, no pressure. He ran a hand through his hair, considered the pieces arrayed before them with a sigh. How many men are we throwing at this? Tywin tutted. Why ask questions you already know the answer to? That many, huh, alright, let's begin. Iron Man's Bay is not so impenetrable as the Ironborn would have us believe. It is vulnerable here, and here. Tywin indicated several points of interest, each of which he committed to memory. A blockade would be wise, but we haven't the numbers for it. Moreover, the Ironborn are reavers and raiders, their sailors outstrip ours. You must strike fast and strike hard, take them by surprise before they can react. I suspect that wily Greyjoy of yours may have a few ideas. Just thinking about Euron left a sour taste in his mouth. Slimy Kraken had made himself useful. Too useful, some might say. Euron mentioned a few, he admitted ruefully, tracing a finger over the map. None of which I like. Tell me of them, then. He did, shortly and succinctly, feeling filthy afterward. Tywin didn't judge him for it. Quote. I see, I'd ask you to keep it clean, but clean ways don't win wars. Grimacing, he took a goblet from the table and drank. Damn, it was only water, he would have preferred wine. On that we both agree. Good, you're learning. Honor was all well and good to a point, until it got you killed. The Starks had yet to learn that lesson. Perhaps they would in the future. Lord Rickard had proven himself flexible when it came to protecting Lyanna. With a bit of luck, his bannermen would learn to bend as well, preferably before they broke. Tell me, his lord father asked suddenly, apropos of nothing, can that faceless woman of yours swim? This time, he couldn't quite hide his smile. Nymeria can, and very well at that. Can she, now? She couldn't before. When did she learn? Heat rose to his cheeks. I taught her. Sex on the beach was great and all, but going at it in the water had a pleasure all its own. Tywin noticed, sharp-eyed as ever. HRRM. Just be careful you don't get a bastard of her just yet. Although, perhaps the Lannisters could do with a Brand family. Naruto nearly choked on his wine and had to thump his chest just to swallow. Excuse me. Calm yourself, Tywin chided him. We've more work to do before the night is done. Your voyage begins tomorrow, or have you forgotten? Joy of joys. The Lord of Castle Rock tapped a finger down on the map once more, indicating the Greyjoy stronghold therein. Quellin is by far the wisest of the Greyjoys, strong and fast at that. He was peaceful and cautious, and wanted neutrality. A pity what's become of him, really. How so? Tywin fixed him with a stern look. There was a time when he wished to reform the Ironborn, to make them a proper Westerosi house. He was in talks with me of it, and I entertained his offers. The resources of the Iron Islands would have been a great boon to us. Cersei might have been shipped off there. Father had never mentioned it. What happened? He suspected the answer, but his father merely confirmed it. Aerys. After a moment's pause, he shrugged. Or perhaps Quellin has been usurped by one of his sons. He had a great many of them. Had implied he no longer did. Dare I ask what became of them? Euron joined us. Tywin counted off his fingers while he spoke, downing one after the other. Aeron was slain during the Battle of Lannisport. Only Victarion and Balon remain, and I suspect it is the latter who leads the Greyjoys now. Slay them, and the Kraken will flounder. Naturally, there's the risk that this is Quellin's doing, and he's leading us into a trap. True, forewarned as forearmed, after all. He didn't like the idea of wiping out a house and tearing down their towers, but there could be no denying the Greyjoys started this. Whether they were pushed, goaded, threatened or coerced, it mattered not. They were enemies. The blood of the West ran gold, and gold burned red hot. He'd drown them in it. Lannisters paid their debts. One way or another. 0.0.0.0. Rhaegar kept riding. His destination was in sight. Silently, he prayed that this would go well. 0.0.0.0. Something stirred in the depths of the ocean. Old and ancient. It awoke. 0.0.0.0. Euron froze in the act of sharpening his sword, the steel slipping from his grasp as a vision took him in its teeth. Keen senses sharpened by magic whispered in his ear, a dire warning of what was to come. A wry smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, carefully concealed behind one hand. Opening his eyes, he stooped low, retrieved his weapon and began anew. Now isn't this interesting? 0.0.0.0. The dawn broke and with it came bittersweet farewells. Must you go? Naruto stood on the docks and peered down at Tyrion, fighting back a wistful smile at his little brother's pleading. You know I can't stay. Ah, but he was a child, and children as he knew, weren't so easily dissuaded. Nymeria's going with you. Said faceless woman was already aboard the ship, awaiting him, no doubt rolling her eyes. Nymeria can fight. Tyrion was positively distraught to see him go, but he couldn't possibly go with them. Neither could Cersei. She understood that. Tyrion didn't. You're taking the Hound. Because the Hound can also fight, better than most at that. Elia and Lyanna also need to stay here as well, no one knows they're at Castle Rock. He knelt down and embraced his brother before he could think to protest again, holding him close to whisper into his ear. I'm leaving the dragons in your care while I'm away. Can I trust you with them? Tyrion's gaze lit up. I'll keep them safe. You have my word. He rose to his feet, idly tussling his hair as he went. I know you will. He'd left countermeasures behind in the event that someone tried anything, but anything that boosted poor Tyrion's confidence was a boon in his eyes. After all this time, he'd become many things, but foolish wasn't one of them. Aerys, if he was truly behind this, might try to strike at Castle Rock while he was away. He'd talked long and loudly with Kurama and Shukaku as to how they might prevent this, with Matabi offering her own input. If a dragon came calling unlikely, he'd be in for a nasty surprise. Elia stepped to him, hands clasped before her, claiming his attention. You will return, I trust. He quirked a brow at her. You doubt me. She took his hands in hers and squeezed. Never. Cersei sidled up next to him and kissed his cheek briskly, as a sibling might. Be safe, little brother. I could say the same of you. Keep up those sword lessons of yours while I'm gone. Her smile was radiant. Perhaps I'll be able to beat you by the time you return. He very much doubted that, but there was no harm in humoring her. Last but by no means least Lyanna stepped up. He saw the spark in her eye and knew at once that she was up to something, if not necessarily what. He soon had his answer as she took him by the face and kissed him fiercely, deeply, passionately, nearly causing him to stumble off the dock entirely and fall into the water before he caught himself. Many a Northman and Westerlander cheered from the ships. His face went red, and turned redder still as Lyanna's lips brushed the outer lobe of his ear. "Come back to me," she whispered. "I'll see you in your dreams." Wait, how did she know about? Joanna Lannister was next, taking him briefly into her arms to hold him tight. "Be safe, my darling boy." He sighed against her. "Mother, I'm not a child anymore." "Even so. Stop coddling him." Tywin was much too stern for such overt displays of affection, but he did clasp a hand to his shoulder. "Save travels." Joanna elbowed him viciously in the ribs until he capitulated and gave him a firm embrace. From someone like Tywin, it meant the world. Of course that meant Tyrion had to latch onto his leg, which gave Cersei an excuse to wriggle into his side. He basked in the warm, familial moment, wishing it would never end. All too soon, it did. "Don't worry my lords and ladies," Euron swaggered up, arms swinging at his sides. "He'll be just fine, I'll make sure of that." Everyone glared at him, not that he could blame them. The Greyjoy had proven himself trustworthy thus far, worryingly so. There had been no tricks, no traps, neither twists nor turns. He'd been a veritable paragon of loyalty and virtue, everything a Greyjoy wasn't. And now here he was, promising to protect him. Just what was he up to? Cersei hissed, "If you harm a hair on his head." Euron chortled softly, "Perish the thought." There was nothing more to be said. With one last lingering look and a goodbye, he grabbed Euron by the arm and dragged him away. From there, they boarded the flagship, and in a matter of moments, they were off. The invasion began. 0.0.0. Movement. Ships approaching. It sensed them in the deep. Something called to it. Hunger. Prey. Food. 0.0.0. They made good time toward the Iron Islands, better than he'd ever dared to dream possible. With the wind in their sails and the sea calm, it promised to be a peaceful voyage. Rather concerning, that. In his experience there was no such thing as a peaceful voyage, impending invasion or otherwise. The Northmen wouldn't be of much use on the water, most soldiers weren't, all the more reason to land and disembark quickly. Armor meant not against the sea. Their journey needed to be a brisk one, quick and efficient to strike at the very heart of the enemy, before all was lost. A day passed in quiet solitude, with naught but the salt of the sea for company. A second swept by in relative peace as well as the spied a pod of dolphins. By the time a third came, he found himself growing restless. Even with their vessel at the head of the fleet and no cover on the open ocean, he still expected an ambush. Any moment now they'd see sails on the horizon, or some recently tamed dragon sage knew there were enough eggs about would come swooping down from the clouds to burn their fleet to ashes. When no such threats appeared and no madness manifested, he only found himself further on edge. Euron didn't help matters any with that smug smile of his and the constant assurances of, "all will be well." Easy for him to say. He couldn't tell whether he was being his usual smarmy self or if he genuinely believed that. Something shook the ship, causing him to lurch forward. What in the world? Impossible. There were no reefs this far out, and the Iron Islands, though visible on the horizon, were still well away. So what, then? Euron hummed thoughtfully, carefully bracing himself against the mast. "You may want to look down." A pang of dread seized him. Reluctantly, he did as the man suggested and gazed into the briny deep. Movement danced in the depths below, too fast for him to properly see. He thought he saw a shadow, a rippling of water that had nothing at all to do with oars. He blinked, scrubbing at his eyes with both hands. Between one blink and another, the giant eye of a creature stared back through the water. Naruto recoiled, recovered now, as recognition dawned. Wait, he knew that eye. One of the sailors saw it, shrieked, and stabbed down with their spear. Sea serpent, kill it. Naruto swore. No, you idiot, wait. Too late, the lance skittered off the beast's scaly brow. A low, sonorous noise shook the world. And that, as they say, was that. The water erupted. Tywin had been right about one thing. What followed would make for a fine song indeed. The seas boiled. A great churning of waves sent the ships rolling, their keels groaning like wounded beasts beneath the fury of the storm. Salt spray lashed the faces of sailors who dared to watch from their decks, their eyes wide with awe and terror. The air reeked of brine and sweat, of desperation and something darker, the scent of dread, thick and cloying. Above, the sky had been clear mere moments before, but the heavens themselves recoiled at the presence of the thing beneath the waves. A howling wind tore through the fleet, bending masts and snapping banners like brittle twigs. Clouds black as a smith's forge churned overhead, drawn forth as if by some unseen hand, a cosmic herald to the beast that now rose from the abyss. A Leviathan. A terror of the deep, spoken of in old sailors' songs and half-whispered tales around drunken hearths. A dragon, but not one of fire and sky. This was a dragon of the abyss, a being of water and shadow, monstrous in its girth and eldritch in its power. 3 colossal tails lashed through the churning sea, each one thick as the masts of a warship, sending geysers of seawater skyward like liquid pillars of doom. Its shell, the color of aged bronze, was encrusted with barnacles, pitted and scarred by countless battles fought in the blackened depths. Each crack, each jagged imperfection upon its hide, spoke of its long reign beneath the waves. Its maw, a yawning abyss lined with jagged tusks, gaped wide, glistening, gluttonous, the abyss given form. It loosed a roar that sent tremors through the air, rattling the bones of every man, drowning out the screams of sailors who clutched their weapons and prayed to gods who had long since turned their faces away. And there, upon its armored back, clinging to the ridges of its spine like some defiant insect before a storm, stood Nathaniel Lannister. The fleets of Stark and Lannister bobbed like driftwood in the maelstrom of the beast's fury. Soldiers and sailors alike stood frozen, their hands gripping ropes and rails with white-knuckled terror. Some muttered prayers, to the Seven, to the old gods, to anything that might hear them in this hour of madness. Others merely watched, their tongues locked in mute horror, their minds unable to grasp the insanity unfolding before them. Even Euron Greyjoy, mad captain of the Silence, stood at the prow of his dread warship, his ever-present smirk wavering. His sea-blue eyes, filled with the hunger of a man who had courted death and danced with monsters, gleamed with something close to reverence. He alone did not quail before the beast. No, he grinned, the way only a man utterly lost to reason could. He saw divinity where others saw doom. And in the heart of the storm, moving with the reckless grace of a man who had long since cast aside fear, Naruto stood unbowed. The Leviathan bucked, twisting its immense form, sending torrents of seawater crashing in every direction. The heavens themselves recoiled from its might. Yet he alone held fast. His fingers, bloodied from the effort, clutched at the armored ridges of its shell, holding it back. His golden hair, slick with salt and spray, clung to his forehead, but his eyes burned with a fire that even the storm could not quench. His free hand reached forward, not for a weapon, not for a lifeline, but for the beast's eye. A massive, crimson orb, the size of a cathedral bell. It was not the eye of some mindless beast. It was ancient, deep, a window into something vast and terrible, an intelligence that had slumbered for eons, waiting, watching. And in that moment, as that great, terrible eye locked onto him, the Lannister lord did not look away. He met its gaze, unflinching, unafraid, a mortal staring into the abyss itself. And the abyss stared back. Something passed between them, unseen and unknowable to the men who clung to their ships, watching in breathless dread. It was not a thing of words or gestures, not even of thought, but something deeper, a current, not of water, but of will. It was old, older than the winds that screamed through the sails, older than the waves that had battered stone into sand. A vast and terrible memory, stretching beyond the reckoning of men, beyond the rise of kings and the fall of empires. The beast hesitated. The titanic tales, which had battered against the sea with relentless fury, slowed. The water stilled, the storm itself seemed to waver, the winds faltering as if holding their breath. Its roar, once a call of defiance and wrath, became something lower, something searching. Naruto's lips parted, and though no mortal could hear him over the howling gale, the dragon did. I know you. Not words, not speech, something greater, a recognition that spanned the depths of time. The great beast exhaled, a warm mist rolling over the sea like the breath of a god. The rage in its massive crimson eye dimmed, shifting, changing. The mindless wrath of the abyss gave way to something far more terrible. Understanding. Then, with a final, world-shaking surge, the Leviathan plunged. It twisted, a mountain of muscle and scale, crashing beneath the waves in a cataclysm of foam and fury, and as it went, it dragged Naruto Lannister down to the depths with it. A cry went up from the fleet. A single, gasping exclamation of horror, then another, then more, shouts of disbelief and despair, voices straining against the deafening silence that followed. For long, breathless moments, there was nothing. No beast, no champion, only the sea, wild and angry, churning with the remnants of what had been. Great whirlpools spun in the Leviathan's wake, drinking the sky in their endless hunger. The waters thrashed, churned, whirled in a mighty maelstrom as the duo did battle beneath the waves. And then, silence. A silence so deep, so unnatural, that it seemed to press upon the world itself. Even the wind, once howling, now dared not speak. Nymeria stared into the depths. Watching, waiting, praying. 0.0.0.0. Funny thing about holding your breath. It sounds easier in the stories. Not so in practice. Naruto realized it the moment he hit the water. He'd sucked in a reflexive breath when Isobu dragged him under, but he knew at once that it wouldn't be enough to last him, not in waters like this. Almost immediately the pressure of the depths ground at him, tore at him, threatened to rip him asunder, and that was ignoring the crushing vice of the reborn Sandy itself, inexorably grinding the life out of him. He lost most of that air almost instantly. Yet even so, he couldn't help but laugh. The three-tailed turtle, reborn as a sea serpent. He should have seen it coming. Kurama would never let him live this down. Channeling chakra to his eyes allowed him to see in the depths, but only just, and he realized his former friend's intentions. He was dragging him down to the depths, either to devour him or suffocate him. Neither were particularly appealing. What would happen if he died again? He didn't want to find out. Even so, he sighed. There could be no hiding this from the world, short of killing Isobu or driving him away, and he couldn't bear to do either. Frankly, he wasn't entirely sure he could defeat him. Not down here in the depths of his domain. Fire was out, wind next to useless, earth, where? Nothing but water down here. Wait, that was it, water. Gritting his teeth, he stopped struggling in Isobu's grasp, reared back and dragged his hands through it, chakra flaring. It was no bloodline, but it didn't have to be. He'd learned to do incredible things as Nathaniel, all to make up for his weakness. Such as this. The temperature plummeted around his fingertips, then his hands he slammed down into the dragon's scales. Not enough. Isobu shuddered, but didn't slow. Cold. Colder. Coldest. A torrent of ice erupted between him and the three tails. The sea dragon snarled, forced to release him as its body spasmed. The moment he did he swam backward, only to find himself face to with the dragon as it came about with frightful speed. So many teeth. Giant jaws clamped down on him, ready to swallow him whole. His hands swept up, catching two of his teeth before they could. From there he used his innate chakra to reverse the temperature yet again, trusting in heat rather than cold. The Sanbi recoiled with a pained shriek, unprepared for the boiling water in its mouth nor its own blazing teeth. Whipping him aside, he settled upon the seabed at last and used chakra to tether himself there, grimacing as the oceanic pressure squeezed him further still. Only then did he truly behold the sheer size of his foe. Isobu truly was massive, neither the size he'd been when he was first created, nor quite the length he'd been as a full-grown Biju, but somewhere between the two, big enough to dwarf him easily, and the ships above besides. He must have hatched ages ago, well before Kurama and the rest. Had he been wandering the seas since then, growing larger as he fed upon the creatures of the deep ache? Naruto doubled over and clutched at his chest. No more dwelling on the past. This would be a brief battle. Already his lungs were beginning to ache. Betrayer. The Sanbi's very roar rattled the depths, the words were thunder in his head. Your death will not be slow. Yeah, should have seen that coming. Sweeping a hand forth, he conjured a Rasengan into his right hand, only to grimace at the water ruined it. Isobu had ways been the wild one, ever the unpredictable one, some might say mad. It was also one of the only Biju he'd had the pleasure of fighting twice, once trying to seal it with his comrades and again during the Fourth Shinobi War. He'd happily take those times over this. He'd been much stronger back then. Now, this might get a little rough. Exhaling forcefully, he tried to expel some of his remaining oxygen into the water and wrap it around his head as a crude bubble of sorts. It was a good plan, a bold plan, sensible for a shinobi. Which he hadn't been for quite some time. Needless to say, he did not succeed. Damn it. Forcing fresh chakra into his lungs bought him precious moments, but not much. Isobu came for him again, jaws gaping wide, to which he twisted aside and slugged him, but the water weakened his punch. What would have been a powerful piston of a pummeling became a weak shove instead, barely redirecting the rampaging beast. He took that split moment of inattention to draw on the natural energy around him the sea had so much, and channel it inward. His eyes gleamed gold. Gotcha. Isobu lashed at him with his many tails in retaliation, forcing him to waste some of that in dodging aside. He caught one, whirled in the water and tossed him, for all the good it did. The sea serpent rounded on him in an instant, titanic jaws snapping just shy of his leg. He expelled more air to shout at him. Will you stop? No. The Sandby's voice was thunder incarnate, rattling his mind even in the depths. You left us, abandoned us, you died and we were scattered to the winds. Now you seek to use us again as weapons of war in your conquest of this world. Never again. He was well prepared for the accusation and quick to counter it, establishing mental link between the two of them lest he drown by wasting what little air he had left. I didn't abandon you, neither did your siblings. Lies, and yet there could be no denying the undercurrent of hope in his voice. You're trying to trick me, seeking to save yourself from a watery grave. Why would I? He shrugged a shoulder as stray bubble escaped his lips. The only way I'm surviving this is with you. It would behoove me to be honest. Isobu paused at that, rumbling in the deep, truly considering his words. The others truly live, then. Kurama and Shukaku and Matabi, yes. He explained slowly, trying not to provoke him. I'm sure the others are out there somewhere. I'm trying to find them, bring them all together, just as before. More sea serpents. Not as such. They're winged dragons, unlike you. The sea dragon shuddered and warbled a mournful note. Then I am alone indeed. Trapped in the depths. Pity kicked at his heart. You're not alone, Isobu. You never have been. I'm sorry I couldn't find you sooner. The water dragon wavered, lashed all three of his tails against the seabed, but didn't direct the shockwave his way. You only say this because you seek my aid. I could really use your help, yeah. Honesty was the best policy when you were about to drown, he found. There's a task I need help with, something only you can do. Not Kurama or any of your siblings. Nearly choking on water, he held out a hand. You're the only one I can count on, Isobu. Please, I need you. And what task do you need me for? Here, let me show you. He swam forward and touched a hand to the dragon's forehead, opening his mind to the great sea beast as he had to only a few others before. Let there be light. 0.0.0.0. Without warning, the sea split. Yoron saw it all, and heard it too. With a sound like the sundering of the world, the ocean tore itself open. A great, rushing column of water burst skyward, a tidal force so vast that the ships rocked like leaves upon a raging river. From the depths, it rose. The Leviathan returned. But it did not thrash. It did not roar. It obeyed. The beast carried him, not as a prisoner, not as prey, but as a rider. Its monstrous tails no longer lashed in fury, but rolled with the rhythm of the waves. Its terrible bulk, once a harbinger of chaos and destruction, now moved with purpose. And atop its armored spine, Naruto stood. His golden hair was slick with salt, his body steady, his chest rising and falling in deep, measured breaths. The breaths of a man victorious. His eyes, sharp as a blade's edge, burned with a fire untouched by the abyss. He looked over the trembling fleet, over the men who had whispered their prayers, over the gods who had turned their faces away. And then, his gaze settled. On the silence. On Euron Greyjoy. The crow's eye, the man who had seen gods and mocked them, who had called the sea his kingdom, who had laughed at the madness of the deep. He did not laugh now. For the first time in all his cursed days, Euron Greyjoy was silent. His lips curled, not in amusement, but in something close to reverence. For in the heart of the storm, before the might of gods and monsters, he had witnessed something greater than both. Euron Greyjoy, who had seen the drowned gods of his people in fevered dreams, who had dared to claim the sea as his own, smiled. I believe we have a new ally, he murmured, his grin widening, his voice barely above a whisper. Or a new god. No man cheered, no voice rose in triumph. The fleet did not roar their approval, did not lift their banners in celebration. They merely watched and remembered. For what they had seen was not for mortal tongues to praise, nor for banners to claim. It was something old, something terrible, something divine. The stark bannermen, clad in storm-soaked gray and steel, stood frozen, their faces blank with shock. They had believed the storm was their doom, that the sea had turned against them, and yet here they stood, alive, untouched, spared by the will of a man they did not understand. The Lannister soldiers, hardened men who had marched beneath the Golden Lion, whispered of miracles, of destiny, of a power that did not belong to any man of Westeros. Naruto was their own, but they saw him now with new eyes. Even an Ironborn such as he, a wild man of the sea, WGO laughed at gods and feared nothing but the depths themselves, stood in odd silence. For if the abyss had a master, if the blackness of the sea had chosen a herald, then who were they to question it? Upon the beast's back, Naruto exhaled, a slow, steady breath. His fingers rested lightly against the dragon's barnacle-crusted shell, feeling the immense, thunderous heartbeat beneath. "You are not my beast," he murmured, his voice barely carried by the wind. "You're my friend." So speaking, he pivoted atop the beast and bellowed at the stunned sailors. "With me now, for wrath, for ruin, to the Iron Islands." The great dragon did not roar with its new master. It did not shake the heavens with its fury, nor cast judgment upon those who had doubted. It merely moved, a great and ancient force, its form cutting through the waves. It led the fleet forward, not as a foe, but as a guardian, guiding them toward their destination. From the deck of the Silence, Euron laughed himself hoarse. A rich, dark sound, filled with amusement and something deeper, something almost like joy. "What a fine beast you have there, little lion," he called, his voice carrying over the waves. Naruto only smiled, not the smirk of a conqueror, nor the sneer of a king. Something simpler, something deeper. His was the smile of a man who had gazed into the abyss and hadn't been found wanting. The Iron Islands awaited, and with their demise, the dawn of a new age. In the distance, the storm broke. 0.0.0. Far away, in the halls of Castle Rock, Tywin Lannister sat in his solar, hard at work. The room was quiet but for the faint scratching of a quill against parchment, the flicker of candlelight dancing over maps and missives of war. His expression was unreadable, his mind occupied with matters of kings and kingdoms, of coin and conquest. But outside, unbeknownst to him, beyond the great golden gates of his stronghold, a shadow approached. A rider, clad in black armor, moved steadily beneath the dragon banner, the standard fluttering in the crisp afternoon wind. Silver hair gleamed beneath the sunlight, bright as a blade. A face that should have been lost to the pages of history was there, real and undeniable, marked by time but unbroken by it. Rhaegar Targaryen had finally arrived. The prince had arrived. Rhaegar Targaryen, here, at Castle Rock. Alone, with no guards to speak of, no escort whatsoever, requesting an audience with him. Tywin Lannister was not one to shout in rage at the unfairness of the world, but he felt an exception ought to be made given the situation. If he could strangle the little twat, toss him into the sea, let the tides take his body and get away with it, he most certainly would. Hells, he'd actually considered throwing the mountain at the princeling just to be done with it. Gregor Clegane had never been quite the same since Nathaniel brutalized him, but he still had his uses. He could pop the brat's skull like a grape and save them a great deal of misfortune. Yet he couldn't, or rather, he could, but he mustn't, no matter how gratifying it might feel. Make no mistake, Tywin was tempted to grant Rhaegar the same courtesy Aerys had Jaime, or barring that, arrange an accident for him. A son for a son. The so-called king was practically holding Jaime hostage after all, and while he had gone willingly for the sake of the family, the fact remained that he held him still. Perhaps he ought to take Rhaegar captive, see how his old friend enjoyed losing a son, make him feel that sting. But he didn't dare, he absolutely did not dare. Any harm that befell the prince here would instantly cast suspicion upon not only him, but his family as well and his every other relative beside. The entire Lannister name would be to blame, and Aerys would descend upon them like his namesake. He'd already sent a runner back to the keep to warn Cersei and the other maidens of the danger and hopefully have the dragons hidden, but he couldn't afford to leave his post at the gate. Rhaegar may not be his father, thank the gods for small mercies, but he would notice if no one was there to greet his arrival. The girls and the dragons. Rhaegar must not see either. So here he stood, wife at his side, bracing himself for the worst. The preening paunch of a prince had always been difficult for his spies to track. His movements were erratic at best, downright reckless at worst. Wherever he went, he brought disaster in his wake. The young man was absolutely obsessed with the power prophecy, that in finding himself a wife, the better to continue his bloodline. Tywin disdained the former, but he could understand the latter. Sympathize with them, even. After all, Rhaegar only had a sickly brother to succeed him in case of disaster, and all new little Viserys was in decidedly poor health, unlikely to survive to adulthood. With the rest of the realm teetering toward war, the royal succession was more important than ever. It spoke well of Rhaegar that he should look after such things, but it also presented something of a problem. Because now he had to come here, to the heart of his power, for purposes unknown. Of all the times for him to arrive. He could not be seen to refuse him either, because the prince would wonder why. And doubtlessly return to his father to complain besides. What in the Seven Hills did the boy want anyway? Was he still trying to find himself a wife? Lyanna had evaded him. The Martell girl had refused him. He found that grimly humorous, which left few noble ladies of the realm available. There were the Tully girls, which would invite the ire of Brandon Stark and Hoster Tully alike, but there was also... Oh, dear. So that was his game, then. It was a good gambit, he must admit. His timing couldn't be better. With Nathaniel and most of the Lannister and Stark forces at sea besides, Castle Rock would have been ripe for conquest, had Rhaegar brought an army. But he hadn't brought an army now, had he? Instead he brought himself. He wanted Cersei. It would have been an honor once, before all this, to bind his blood with the royal line. The opportunity of a lifetime. The chance to seat a grandchild on the Iron Throne, and through them, control the realm for ages to come, creating a dynasty without end. Now, it was akin to a death sentence. None of these damnable dragons save perhaps Raella could be trusted. Not a one. He had seen what madness did to the mind of a man, how it turned the once affably eccentric heiress into a cruel, craven creature who burned others for pleasure and jumped at the sight of his own shadow. Joanna must have already figured it out, too, because his wife looked fit to spit. Her once serene countenance was now dark and stormy as the legendary squalls of Storm's End themselves. As a matter of fact, she rather resembled a tempest herself right now. Ah, but here came the prince now, and he must attend. If he failed today, if Cersei were taken or worse, the dragons discovered, the whole of House Lannister would burn. Nathaniel and Nymeria were days away at best, a week at the worst. Should things go south, they would return to find Castle Rock under siege, or worse, burned to the ground. Nathaniel would be wroth. He had no illusions about what his son would do, and what would follow. He mustn't fail. The very fate of the Seven Kingdoms depended upon him. Was it too late to kill the prince? Clad in a red doublet with matching black trousers, Rhaegar was the very epitome of a Targaryen, all pale hair and bright, violet eyes, wearing an easy smile besides. Tywin knew such smiles all too well. They seemed kind and genial on the surface, but they often hid madness beneath. As he looked on, the prince dismounted his dark steed and alighted nimbly before them, grinning from ear to ear. "Good morrow to you, my lord, my lady Tilda." He sketched a bow to them despite his status. "I wish I could have brought Sir Jaime with me, but father refuses to let him leave the keep these days." "You honor us," Joanna smiled demurely, but it didn't reach her eyes. "But his a Kingsguard, my prince." "Ah, but I am the prince." He winked their way. "If I say he can bend his vows a little, he should be allowed to visit his family." Joanna tensed beside Tywin, gripping his hand tight. Was that a threat, or was the boy simply daft? Likely the latter. Rhaegar was not vicious like his father, but he wasn't, right in the head. All the more reason not to let this insipid twit ascend the Iron Throne. Westeros was barely surviving the reign of the Mad King. It would not endure that of a stupid son and his equally idiotic descendants. No, he didn't trust him for a moment, not with his daughter, not with anyone. He did not hate this silly fool. Fools like him were often what made the realm go round. But neither could he allow him to have his way. To business, then. Tywin hid his grimace behind an impassive mask and forced himself to begin. "My prince, we weren't expecting you. To what do we owe the visit?" Rhaegar didn't realize the danger. His smile was jovial, almost merry even. "I had hoped to pay call upon your daughter." Joanna inhaled reflexively, her suspicions confirmed. And so it began. 0.0.0.0. "You must hide." Lyanna nearly fell out of bed as Elia Martell came crashing into her room in a swirl of golden silk, the act of which startled her poor pup. Little Shadow had never been one for loud noises. He was a direwolf at heart, and he barked loudly as the Dornishwoman gathered her up and dragged her across the room. He didn't cease until Lyanna swept him up into her arms, and even then he kept whining until she stroked his ears. Whispering sweet nothings seemed to calm him somewhat, but only just. It did nothing at all for her own racing heart. "Hide." Elia bundled her into an empty wardrobe. "We cannot be seen here." She tried to resist only to find herself overpowered. "Why?" A baron's sister rounded on her, eyes wild and tea-bared. "Rhaegar Targaryen has come." 4 little words, and yet they turned her very blood to ice. Her blood ran cold. "The prince, here, has he come for us?" "No." Her sister in arms shook her head and began tapping at the back of the wardrobe for reasons she didn't understand. I do not believe so, else he would have brought an army. He is here to court Cersei, I suspect. We should have anticipated this. Lyanna scarcely heard the words. Her ears were ringing. The world was swimming around her. Nathaniel had promised to protect her from Rhaegar. But her love wasn't here, he was a world away. Fear kicked furiously at her breast. If it came to that, then. She gripped the knife she kept at her belt. No dragon shall grow in my belly. Nor mine. Elia pried her hands away from the dagger, held them, and kissed her knuckles for good measure. I have seen where that future leads and want no part of it. Lyanna paused, briefly baffled. Seen the future, but that implied. Aha! Crowing in triumph, the Martell finally found what she was looking for and pressed something within the wardrobe. Almost immediately, the back of it slid away, revealing a dark passage therein. Lyanna hesitated at the sight of it, clutching little Shadow close to her chest. The direwolf puppy whined, sensing her distress. Elia cared for none of it and shoved them both forward with a snarl. Move. Lyanna did so, albeit reluctantly, glancing about herself with mild trepidation. What is this place? A secret passage. Elia lifted her skirts and stepped in after her, painstakingly sealing the passage behind her as she went. Nathaniel told me of it. We shall be safe in here. A baron awaits us on the other side. But what of Cersei? The princess grimaced and pushed her along. She must find a way to deny Rhaegar without rousing his wrath. Easier said than done where princes were concerned. And if she doesn't? The silence was her answer. In it, another awful thought occurred. What about the dragons? They are clever creatures. They must fend for themselves. 0.0.0.0. Cersei raced down the steps to the stone garden, taking them two at a time in her haste. Tyrion stumbled after her, tripping over himself as he tried to follow. Sister, he called out after her. Wait. She couldn't. She didn't have time to coddle him right now. If they were found out now, everything would be undone. She had mere moments, minutes at best, even then it might not be enough. Someone must warn them. Now. By luck or chance, the dragons weren't hard to find. She found them lounging in the weirwood. Red one was sunning himself against the rocks, the brown beast was playing in the sandy dirt, while the blue one had perched herself in the weirwood tree and reclined there like some sort of queen. Dragons really were remarkable creatures, but whereas once their majesty might have slowed her, now she hadn't the time for it. Panic gave her legs wings of their own and lifting her skirts, she hastened their way. Each of them heard her coming, for they looked up as one. Cersei flailed her arms at the lot of them. No time for pleasantries here. Hide yourselves. She hoped they understood her. Someone is coming to take you away. The red dragon Kurama drew himself up with a sonorous hiss, 9 scaled tails lashing at the ground. He was the largest by far, and his crimson slits regarded her with eerie intelligence. A plume of smoke escaped his nostrils as he snorted once, perhaps in amusement, and lumbered towards her. She almost shrank back at the sight of him. The brown dragon Shukaku scoffed and ignored her outright, content to frolic as it pleased until Kurama lashed it with his tails. The smaller dragon flopped on its back with an outraged squawk, but it was ultimately the blue dragon Matabi raised her long neck to regard her imperiously. Oh ho! Her voice was rich like the purest of honey, mismatching eyes burning like the sun and moon alike. Much has changed since we last met, little lion. She would seem congratulations are in order. Gods be good, but she understood her. Cersei nearly fainted dead away from sheer shock. Nathaniel must have done something to her during their last dream together, because she found she could understand her perfectly. Not so the other two, not yet, but she'd take what she could get. Under any other circumstance, she would have marveled at it. But she hadn't the time. She explained herself quickly, hurriedly, as best she could. The dragons listened intently. Once her tale was done, Kurama inhaled sharply, the sound akin to fire crackling over paper. Matabi echoed it, albeit far more quietly. Rest assured, the pretender will not touch us. Go, little lion, and gird yourself well against this so-called prince. We shall hide ourselves away from him. How? They couldn't fly out the cavern. They'd be seen by the people of Castle Rock and Lannisport besides. To say nothing of the prince himself, if he was still without rather than within the castle proper. Clinging to the ceiling might be an option for Shukaku and Matabi, until someone looked up, and besides, Kurama was much too large for that. Yet the blue dragon granted Shukaku a most intent glower, smug like a cat. We have our ways. Remarkably, the little bastard drew chirped twice and himself upright on all fours, preening. Matabi rolled her eyes. He says witness me, and tell Naruto of his greatness. Cersei felt her brow furrow. What does he mean by that? THWOOM. She didn't have time to ask, because the soil suddenly erupted into sand. 0.0.0.0. At long last, it was his time to shine. Shukaku looked to the sandy floor of the cavern, considering it with a gimlet eye. Tapping it with a claw, he considered the soil's composition. It wasn't the best, but he'd been working at it for some time now. It would do. An idea dawned. It wasn't a good one, was far from his best, really, yet it was all he had. Besides, this was a chance to show off before the female. Who would then tell Naruto of his noble deeds here today, thereby elevating him much further in his eyes than these two lackwits. Ergo, wealth, fame, power, glory. Not wasting that. His wings might be small and stunted still, but his claws were long and sharp. He still held command of the sands, weakened though he was. So he did what he did best. He started digging. It took time, longer than he would have liked given his size, but even in this reduced form he was still Shukaku. The one-tailed raccoon, lord of the sands. The sandy soil was his domain and it bent to his will now just as it had in the days of old. In less than 3 minutes, he'd made a burrow. He ushered his larger sibling into his crudely crafted hole in the earth, paused just long enough to form a pocket to breathe with an air bullet, and forced the sandy soil to swirl upward, concealing his work. Crowing proudly at Cersei, he dove in after them with a triumphant cry and sealed it behind him. Witness me tilde. It wouldn't last forever. Dragons they might now be, but they still had to breathe. He slammed the crude lid shut behind them. And prayed for a miracle. 0.0.0.0. Just like that, Cersei found herself alone. She took a deep breath to fortify herself, spun on her heel, and marched back up the steps by which she'd come. From there she found poor Tyrion sitting where she'd left him, still somewhat stunned from his fall. Taking pity upon her baby brother, she promptly swept the not dwarf up into her arms and continued her ascent. From there, she stalked up the steps to meet Rhaegar, knowing full well what he intended for her. He wanted to spirit her away from here, take her and break her and make her his queen. A lifetime ago, she would have jumped at such an opportunity. No longer. This was not her destiny. If fate said otherwise, she would break its jaw. 0.0.0.0. The Iron Islands heaved with chaos. Under normal circumstances, Balon Greyjoy rather enjoyed chaos. Chaos was opportunity, some might even call it a ladder. He had used it to climb quite high these past few months, moving from the firstborn son of Quelyn Greyjoy to the Lord Reaper of Pike itself. He had paid the iron price and used it to elevate himself well beyond his station in record time. He had the tacit if silent support of the crown. He was to take the West and ravage all in his path. Ruin the Lannisters, plunder them dry. The dragon would not interfere. So had been the plan. Until the storm came. It swept up out of the west without warning, bringing doom in its wake. Now his men were deserting in droves, fleeing in the face of this unnatural weather, this terrible fog that clung to everyone and everything. A man could scarcely see a foot before his face, let alone sail. One by one the isles had gone quiet these last few days, until only the seat of his power remained. Ravens were sent, but did not return. This was not what he'd been promised. There was no sign of the grand victory he had been assured. With father out the way, it should have been easy. Why, then, why wasn't it easy? Ironborn did not sow. We do not sow. That was a lie. They had sown the wind and now reaped the whirlwind. But it was not over while he yet drew breath. He would not surrender the seastone chair to these usurpers any more than he would Lordsport nor the rest of the isle. If they wished to take it from him they must pay the iron price, and he was determined to reap a grim toll. Yet despite the fog, there were no ships on the horizon. Only a storm. The drowned god favored him still, it seemed. What manner of Ironborn loses his wits in a storm? Not him. He was no fool like Euron. He would endure this storm, outlast the lion and the dragon both, and then, oh yes, then. He would take what he was owed. Balon had grand ambitions. The realm was fractured, distracted. War was coming. The Ironborn thrived in war. And he would have it all. A sudden peal of thunder drew his attention, forcing him away from his glorious grandeur. Without warning, the fog lifted and the sea shifted around the Iron Islands. He heard them, then. Drums in the deep, across the water, saw the ships, so very many, many with sails he recognized traders, each belting out a singular cadence with their instruments of war. Be they drums, or something else, something far worse. Regardless, he heard it all the same. Thud, thud, thud. Men were chanting alongside that noise, a bone-chilling cadence that only grew louder with each passing moment. That terrible stomping rhythm beckoned something from the deep. And then, quite suddenly, splash. The sea split and Balon Greyjoy looked up as a mighty serpentine shadow fell over him. Someone screamed down below the towers. He was never sure who, but he suddenly rather felt like joining them, because there, on the horizon, he saw something before the shills. And there, rising from the deep like the drowned god himself, was death from the depths. Not just his death, the death of all Ironborn upon Pike and the Iron Islands as a whole. Doom brought by the waves. A titanic sea serpent rose from the depths, long as his many towers were tall. It wasn't even the full bulk of the beast, he could glimpse still more lurking under the water. It was the biggest creature he'd ever seen, its lone eye larger than a man was tall. And there, sitting atop its head, riding the creature, was a man. No, not merely a man. Blonde hair, bright eyes. He screamed at him, nearly incoherent with rage. Lannister. Impossibly, he was heard. Greyjoy. Nathaniel's voice boomed like thunder, rattling the very heavens. Your end has come. We bring the destruction of Pike. At his command, the savage sea serpent looked to the skies and roared. It was an awful sound, just the sort of beast from the deep might make, so sonorous that Balon found himself momentarily deafened by it, left clutching at his bloody ears. High above, the heavens darkened yet further. An already overcast sky became darker still as rain began to fall with renewed ferocity, slowly at first, then with gusto as the wind picked up. Lightning lanced out at the top of a tower, obliterating it with an almighty crack. One of his sons died in that instant. And in that instant, Balon finally understood. This beast had summoned the storm. In an instant, the very sea turned against the Isle of Pike, spawning cyclones and waterspouts, maelstroms, every horror imaginable, all brought to bear upon the land. The very sight of it stole the strength from his veins. The Iron Islands had weathered many a storm before, and hopefully would since, but none like this. It was as though the very wrath of the drowned god made manifest. And he was mightily displeased with them for their many failures. Or perhaps there had never been a drowned god at all. Perhaps he was the fool. The sea dragon reared back and spat. With it, a spout of water burst forth from the beast's maw to barrel towards the seat of Balon's power. No, he realized, not quite a spout. Westeros lacked the word for it. The elemental nations did not. 'Twas not an arrow of water, but something far worse. A water bullet. The blast knew no mercy. It struck the base of the tower he occupied. Balon's world teetered as everything went sideways. His head struck something. Darkness obliterated his vision. Reality lurched forward once more. Balon Greyjoy dearly wished it hadn't. Sleep had been painless, peaceful, preferable even. One could not be harmed in one's dreams after. Slumber was silent, devoid of danger. The waking world was not. Awakening brought with it complete, utter agony, the mounting realization all was not well, and when he awakened his body protested viscerally. Ears ringing, eyes stinging, he could scarcely hear a thing. Such was the muffled state of his world, blood on his tongue from a cracked skull and a broken nose besides. These were but a handful of the injuries he noticed upon opening his eyes. Against all odds, he had survived the balcony's collapse when his tower crumbled, but only just. Dust and bits of broken masonry coated his battered body like a burial shroud, yet by some miracle, perhaps the drowned god's own grace, he yet lived to see another sunrise. It was not a joy, far from it. He very much wished he were dead. His right arm hung limp at his side, badly broken, and his left leg lay twisted horribly beneath him, reducing his gait to a slow shuffling walk. Yet the pain didn't impede him overmuch, such was the shock he was even now suffering from. He hadn't been out for very long, evidently it was long enough for chaos to take the world. Shards of light danced before his vision as he limped forward, fleeting moths of brilliance in the gloom gradually resolving into shambling shadows adopting the shape of men. Some fled, others were chased. Enemies. In an instant, Balon remembered what was happening. Dazed though he might be, he still had his sword, and he drew it from his sheath with his good hand in a clumsy motion as he staggered forward. The fog might be gone, but the fog of war had fallen about Pike instead, dragging the rest of the Iron Islands with them. Soldiers were landing, disembarking from the boats below, like a horde of frenzied ants. Some were scaling the cliffs using strange devices he didn't recognize. Others wielded great swords of whose make he didn't recognize damnable Northmen, and still more wore Lannister armor, cutting down everyone in sight. Worse, there were Manderly's Malisters among them. Bah! Still more wore familiar armor and brandished known crests as they cut down the brave men of Pike. Blacktide, Botley, Harlaw, Merlin and Spar. Goodbrother. Willful traitors, all. Small wonder the other islands had gone silent. They had been beaten, beset, bludgeoned until they broke. Because there, looming above them all, wreaking havoc, spitting great geysers of water to splinter stone and flay flesh. The sea serpent, no, the Leviathan. Balin wasn't sure why he called it such, only that he did, the name etched into the very forefront of his mind. It had yet to leave the sea. Frankly, he wasn't sure it could, but it didn't have to, because it was hard at work in its own way. Surging and slamming and smashing through the remaining ships of the Greyjoy fleet with the reckless abandon, it targeted the commanders, almost as though it knew exactly where they were. Those that fell into the sea were summarily devoured, or worse, sank in their armor, and drowned, never to rise again. Euron might have considered that a blessing once, to go with the drowned god and feast in his sunken halls. Now he no longer knew what he believed, for a beast of the deep was laying waste to his isle. What could possibly harm such a creature? The answer was obvious: nothing. Had the Lannister wished it, he could have ended this in an instant. Commanded his serpentine steed to blast all of Pike's towers into the sea and let the tides sort them out. But he didn't. Instead, he drew it out, eradicating them all one by one, sparing none. He was thorough. How had he arrayed so many allies against him? Had he known they would lash out at Lannisport? Was this all part of his plan? Would this be the end of the Greyjoys? No, he couldn't have planned this, not the involvement of Aerys, not his backers, it just wasn't possible. The boy couldn't have possibly seen this far ahead. It wasn't possible. It could not be. Balin. A voice pierced the din of war and his thoughts alike to fill his still ringing ears. Face me. With those words his ears popped, and unfortunately he could hear again. The broken Kraken stumbled to the side and beheld his traitor brother storming his way. Euron recognized him, too, for his face lit with feral triumph. He waded forward, axe in one hand, sword in another, each already slick with blood, fixed on yet more. An Ironborn tried to bar his path and was summarily cut down for their efforts, followed by two more. Balin stumbled back, warding his blade before his face with a trembling arm. Yet Euron made no move to take it. He paused a ways away, grinning. Hello, brother. Balin spat at him. Disgrace of an Ironborn. His younger sibling preened. And yet here I stand, on the winning side. Bah, what did the lion promise you? Gold, iron, ships. Freedom. His upper lip curled in distaste. You'll kill me for that, then. He wasn't prepared for his smile. No, brother, I won't be the one to kill you. I simply wanted to watch. Balin bristled. Watch what? A flicker of movement from the right was his only warning. He tried to turn, but even then it was too late. Something struck his sword arm aside, forcing the blade high. Even then he managed to parry another blow before his arm was shunted aside in its entirety, leaving him wide open. In that instant he glimpsed familiar blonde hair, those bright eyes, that insufferable smile, and knew his killer. Just as he knew what was coming next, what would inevitably come, as was his wont. Sure enough, a blade bit into his belly, bringing him low, down to his knees. The pain was unlike anything he'd ever known. The sword sliced through his stomach and emerged out his back, piercing him in a single thrust of the blood-spattered steel. No, wait. The blade itself was red. He knew this sword, knew it well. 'Twas no mere weapon, but red rain. A Valyrian steel sword, treasure of House Drum, vassal house pledged to the Greyjoys. Or so they had been. His eyes bulged in bitter realization as he put two and two together. He'd not seen the banners of House Drum in the battle, neither on his side nor the Lannister. The whelp must have broken them badly to take their prize from them. Perhaps they too had been eradicated, as House Greyjoy soon would be. But this wasn't over. Did he truly think things would end with the death of the Kraken? Fool. Lannister. Blood bubbled up past his lips, frothing out his last breath. Greyjoy. It was both greeting and a goodbye wrapped in one. This is only the beginning. You will never know peace. Those bright, blazing eyes narrowed upon him. He did not respond, did not brag of his prize. His arm simply arced back. Swung down, now. Steel sang. Balin felt no pain. A head flew through the air. After all this, Death was a mercy. 0.0.0.0. Victarion wasn't stupid. Dumb as a stump they called him, a dullard and a brute. Most might think he was, but he wasn't. He knew when the wind was poor and the tides were turning. And right now, they were turning against Pike. This was the end of the Greyjoys. Euron might live a little while longer, but the lion would kill him eventually, too. Didn't matter to him, not really. This only ended one way. With him dying to steal, or that fucking sea dragon. Victarion wasn't stupid, but he was no coward either. He slammed on his helmet, took up his axe and shield, and went to die in the defense. He cut down Northmen and Lannisters alike, bellowing challenges as he went, demanding a true fight, a worthy foe until finally he found one. There, a massive man as large as he was tall, ripping apart Greyjoys like they was so much meat. He recognized the helm, Sandor Clegane, the Hound. A grin split his face beneath his kraken helm. This would be a good death. Something struck his side before he could meet him. Victarion tumbled into blackness. Fate would decide if he awoke. 0.0.0.0. Nymeria knew her task. Joanna had been paramount. This was to be Nathaniel's Castamer. No survivors, no means by which the Greyjoys might tally. Pyle would be purged. An example must be made. Let her heart be the one stained with this sin, let she be the one to bloody her hands dipped so that Nathaniel might remain clean and pure. And if he learned of this, if he came to hate her for it, then so be it. That too, was what it meant to love someone. You stood by their side through thick and thin, helped shoulder their burdens with them. Even if they didn't ask you to. She closed her heart to the cries of the battlefield, donned one of her faces, and went to work. All Greyjoys must die. 0.0.0.0. Naruto had seen tailed beasts wreak havoc in battle before. Yet there was something about naval warfare that made it all seem oddly impersonal. From his reclaimed perch atop Isobu he had watched the enemy drown. One by one. They would sing songs of this, twist his deeds into legend. They would spend 3 days purging Pike. 0.0.0.0. The sea was red. 3 days had passed since the storming of the Isle, yet the waters still lapped at the jagged shore like a dog at the bone, tinged the color of rust and old wounds. Salt hung heavy in the air, but it was not alone. Smoke rode beside it, and something fouler still, the iron stench of blood, clotted thick on the rocks and slicked through the tide pools. The gulls had come by the hundreds, their cries sharp as broken glass, wheeling and shrieking as they picked at swollen corpses in the surf. Carrion kings, they feasted freely. Pike burned still, not with the wild fury of fire freshly loosed, but with the low, persistent smolder of a ruin too proud to die quickly. Stone blackened, timber wept soot, and smoke curled from ancient halls where once kings had plotted with salt in their veins and iron in their hearts. Now, only ghosts remained, ghosts in the ash of 1,000 drowned oaths. The Greyjoys were no more. Naruto stood atop the cliff's edge, the wind dragging at the gold-threaded hem of his cloak, setting it to flapping like a war banner left too long in the rain. He did not shiver. The cold of the sea was nothing compared to the chill that clutched his bones. His hands were clenched at his sides, not from weather, but from memory. Ghosts clung to his fingers, their touch slick and red. He had not wanted this. Gods, he had not asked for this. Yet it was done. One death was simple, clean. A man can be forgiven a single death, even a necessary one. But this had been no execution. This had been butchery, drawn out across 3 long days and longer nights, each dawn more smoke-choked than the last. The Ironborn had fought as they had lived, wild and without mercy. They called themselves reavers, raiders, sons of the sea, and they had died as such, shrieking like beasts when the Leviathan rose from the deep and shattered their ships like kindling. Some leapt willingly into the black waves rather than face the serpent's fury. Others met his soldiers on the black beaches, axes in hand, prayers to the drowned god bubbling from split lips. Isobu's roar had drowned out their war cries, but not their defiance. Victarion Greyjoy had been lucky in that regard. Clegane had found his fallen body and dragged him to the cells out of pity. He might live, once they'd finished wringing information out of it. The rest were not so fortunate. There was no glory in it. Not when keeps fell with children still locked within. Not when widows tore their hair and wailed as steel found their bellies. Not when the breakers ran slick with the blood of babes. Naruto closed his eyes. He could still hear them. Not the dying, but the ones left alive. The sobbing, the screaming, the silence after. That was the worst. The silence. The sea serpent had brought them victory, yes, but victory wore a crown of bone and sat upon a throne of corpses. Is this justice? He asked the wind. The wind did not answer. Behind him, the new banners of his fleet whipped in the gale, red spirals like eyes watching from another world. His men stood quiet and grim, swords sheathed, their armor caked with soot and spray. Even the beasts were hushed. The wolves refused to howl. The serpent stirred not. The victory feast had soured before it could begin. Somewhere, far below, the last tower of Pike gave a groan and collapsed into the sea with a sound akin to that of a dying god. Naruto watched it fall. Let it drown, he thought. Let it all drown. But the ghosts did not drown. They never did. This was your Castamer. Nymeria's voice drifted to him, soft as sea mist, as she emerged from the surf like something born of it. Her black boots left no mark on the blood-slick stones. She was soaked to the waist, her robes clinging like second skin, hair plastered in pale ropes across her sharp cheeks and sun-darkened brow. She smiled, but there was no joy in it, only weariness, brittle and sharp as a dulled blade. Behind her, Isobu loomed in the shallows. Foam clung to his carapace. His great eye blinked slowly, mournfully. A low trill escaped his maw as Nymeria passed beneath him, and she reached up to pat his curling horn. The beast hummed like a forge left to cool, deep, trembling, almost sad. Naruto did not turn, he did not need to. He could feel her, the blood on her skin, though the waves had rinsed it clean. It clung in the air, thick as oil, in the weight of her steps and the scent beneath the salt. You did it, then, he said. I did. How many? Nymeria paused. Her hands were folded now, delicate, almost reverent. All. He turned, slowly. His face was stone. All, he repeated. She met his gaze, eyes dark as storm glass. All, the women, the babes, the bastards, the daughters, the wives, all Greyjoys, from the iron seat to the youngest cradle. A long breath escaped him. The wind caught it and flung it out to sea. Nymeria looked away first. The salt wives I freed, she added after a moment. The thralls too. I am not a monster. No, his voice was flat, distant. You're my shadow. Yes, she said, and in her mouth it was not agreement, but a pronouncement. And this is the price of peace. You wanted them gone. They are gone. No rebellion, no retreat, no revenge. The sea is silent, and the kraken sleeps. The wind tugged at his cloak again, snapping it like a banner over a field gone to rot. He looked out over the remains of Pike. The embers were fewer now. The gulls quieter. Smoke curled in lazy spirals toward the graying sky. The dead did not scream. But they lingered. And what if I had told you to spare them? He asked, soft now, so soft the sea itself strained to hear. Nymeria stepped closer, her boots crunching over the remains of a rusted helm, half sunken in the sand. She stopped an arm's length from him. You didn't. Her voice held no anger, no triumph, just truth. Naruto's eyes drifted to her hands. Pale, scarred, steady. Hands that had once braided a child's hair. Hands that had slit a babe's throat this very week. You would have done it, though, he said. Not a question. Nymeria's brow creased faintly. I would have argued. He looked back toward the sea. And if I'd insisted? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. There were truths even shadows would not speak aloud. Naruto exhaled through his nose, slow and trembling. The blood is on both our hands. No, she said. The blood is in the water. A gull shrieked overhead. Isobu stirred behind them, his tail coiling like a leviathan's whisper. Somewhere far off, a horn sounded, a mournful thing, low and long, echoing from a ship hidden in the mist. A raven will go to Castle Rock, Nymeria said after a long silence. Your father will want to know. Naruto nodded. And the wolf? She smiled again, thinner now. Lord Rickard will understand. That, he didn't doubt. He'd seen the man fighting in the thick of things, before the butchery. Will he forgive? Not likely. Her eyes gleamed like wet stone. But he'll remember. 0.0.0.0. The fighting had ended, but the dying continued. Sailors dragged bloated bodies from shattered hulls, coughing from smoke and salt both. Looters picked through ironborn halls, taking more than just gold, taking retribution. Killing. Naruto had ordered restraint. Nymeria had offered a different command. Leave none that might seek vengeance. Joanna's words, cold and clear. This had not been war. It had been extermination. The deed was done. 0.0.0.0. Beneath the burning sky, Naruto descended toward the tide. He waded through the water until it kissed his thighs, boots swallowed by the sea. Isobu shifted, rumbling softly as he approached. The Leviathan's great red eye blinked slowly. Nymeria stood beside him again, quiet now, face turned to the waves. He reached up and placed a hand on Isobu's shell. The beast cooed. Naruto blew out a sigh. Does it ever end? No, Nymeria said, but it changes. You carry it differently. He fell silent. Then, slowly, he waded deeper into the water until he was shoulder deep. There, he stood with his back to the shore, to the ruin, to the men piling corpses like driftwood. He knew he should feel wretched, terrible, awful, and he did, yet he also felt relief, glad that the butchery was over. The Greyjoys would never threaten the Lannisters, or anyone else, ever again. He would remember this, the wailing and the weeping. The tears of the defeated, broken by his army. Yet his tears never came. He supposed that was a good thing. He might not cry, but he still felt wretched, which meant he still had a heart somewhere to feel them. He stood vigil nevertheless. Such was his duty as the victor, to watch. The sea swallowed the corpses, one by one. 0.0.0.0. 3 days. 3 God's damned days. 3 days, and the bastard was still here. Cersei was ready to tear her hair out. Didn't this posh prick of a prince realize he was wearing out his welcome? Leave already. Rhaegar Targaryen most assuredly did not leave. Instead he sang to her, recited poetry, offered her treats as though she were a bird in a cage. In her own home. Cersei Lannister stared at the intricate tiles of her mother's solar as though they might sprout fangs and speak. She had paced this same circle near 100 times. Her skin crawled from the false honeyed words, the endless compliments, the lingering stares. He was beautiful, certainly. A harpist with silver gold hair and melancholy eyes. A prince of songs and sad stories. A prince with no bloody sense of boundaries. Every morning he came, bringing gifts, flowers, books, even a cage of doves once. And every night he stayed too long, speaking of prophecy and destiny and the dragon's 3 heads. She might have endured that. Might, but, just yesterday, he had asked her to sing. Sing. Cersei had forced the words out, hating how they sounded. I shall entertain your offer. I need time to think. Alone. He'd pouted a little at that. But I've only just arrived, might I have proof of your intentions? He seemed kind enough, but she'd known kind men before. He was a prince, the prince, and he was not at all accustomed to being told no. She was a lioness of the West. She would not be a bird in a cage. Mother and father were of no help at all. They could not force him away any more than she could. Such would be seen as a grave offense. Father was probably itching to kill the prince, but he couldn't do that either, for if any harm befell him, word would reach the king, and then his wrath would fall upon them. So she smiled. So she sang. So she endured. Now he was here again, seated across from her with that same gentle, maddening smile. In his lap rested an ornate satchel. I have brought something, he said. Cersei's mouth twitched. Unless it's a sword through your gut, I doubt I'll care. He chuckled. Ever the lioness. No, not a sword. With theatrical care, he drew the satchel open and removed a black stone. It gleamed dully in the torchlight, veins of crimson pulsing faintly beneath its smooth surface. A dragon egg. Her breath caught. No, why did he have one? Where did you get that? Her voice was sharper than a dagger's kiss. Rhaegar beamed. In the catacombs beneath Dragonstone. I felt it calling to me. Her throat closed. Did you try to hatch it? Not yet, he said. But I can feel it. The fire, it stirs. Panic bloomed within her, and her temper, so thinly restrained, slipped its leash. Cersei stood so suddenly her chair screeched across the stone. You utter fool, do you know what you've done? He blinked, caught off guard. You brought it here, in the keep, have you no sense, no understanding? I thought it would please you. He looked genuinely wounded. Cersei pressed her fingers to her temple. Oh, 7 preserve me. You dolt. A dragon egg. Yes, she hissed. A thing of power. A thing that could bring the whole realm to ruin if it hatches. Do you even know how to control it? What it might be? You don't. She seized the egg and flung it into the hearth with a snarl. Flames leapt higher, dancing madly around it. Rhaegar reached for it. No. Leave it, she snapped. Touch it and I swear I'll carve the harp from your bloody back. His mouth opened, closed. Leave, she growled. But. Get out. The prince hesitated one moment longer. Then, with a heavy heart, he bowed and left her chambers, the dragon egg smoldering behind him in the hearth. 0.0.0. Cersei waited until the door clicked shut. Then she staggered back, hand braced against the mantel. Her heart thundered in her chest. An egg. If that contained what she thought it did. ... Nathaniel's wrath would be great. She would need to speak to mother and father. Gods, but she had to warn Nathaniel before it was too late. She must, lest he return and see him here. Nathaniel was going to murder Rhaegar Targaryen. 0.0. News of a different sort shocked the realm come next morning, delivered by way of dark-winged ravens. Little Prince Viserys Targaryen, not Rhaegar, had perished in the dead of night. Poisoned by the king's enemies. The bells had not yet begun to toll when the raven came to Castle Rock. It arrived in the earliest sliver of dawn, a black shadow flitting against a sky of pale gray, and its caw shattered the morning calm. The bird bore a message bound with the royal seal of King's Landing. By midday, that message and the news it carried spread across Westeros like wildfire. That foul substance would have been kinder, given what followed. In the castle's high hall, Lord Tywin Lannister broke the wax and read the raven's words in silence. The small gathering of nobles and retainers waited, their breath bated. Cersei Lannister stood rigid beside her mother, Lady Joanna, fingers twisting in the folds of her gown. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen hovered near the hearth, face drawn and pale in the candlelight that had not yet been snuffed. Tywin's green eyes flickered as he read, but his face was stone. Only when he finished did he lift his gaze. Viserys Targaryen is dead. A stunned silence fell. For an instant, all that could be heard was the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below the rock. Joanna exhaled a soft, wounded gasp. Dead, she whispered, as if she could not believe the word. Tywin rolled the parchment and handed it off to a waiting steward. The raven says the boy died in the night. An illness of some kind. His tone was calm, almost indifferent, yet a glint in his eye suggested he knew illness was seldom so swift or convenient. Rhaegar took a step forward, golden firelight lapping at the edges of his silver hair. Let me see it. Tywin gave a curt nod, allowing the boy's impudence. The steward offered the message to the prince. Rhaegar's long fingers trembled ever so slightly as he unrolled the tiny scroll and scanned its contents. Cersei watched his violet eyes move rapidly over the words. She saw them widen in shock, then narrow with growing fury. This says he was poisoned, Rhaegar said, voice tight. He looked up sharply. By the king's enemies. A murmur rippled through the hall. Poison. A coward's weapon, a woman's weapon some might say, and a treasonous act against the crown. Cersei drew in a breath. Poisoned. Gods have mercy. By whose hand? He demanded, looking to Rhaegar. Does the message say? Rhaegar shook his head, jaw clenched. No, only that my brother was taken by a traitor's cowardice. His voice cracked on the last word. Clearly Aerys's court blamed some enemy in the shadows. Or perhaps Aerys blamed all of them. Cersei placed a hand on her mother's arm, alarmed. She could feel Joanna tense beside her. If King Aerys believed one of his enemies had murdered Viserys, then he would surely point a finger at the Lannisters or at anyone he deemed a foe. Her father's expression betrayed nothing, but Cersei knew Tywin would already be calculating what this meant for their cause. One less Targaryen male in the line of succession, but also a provocation that could ignite the realm. Tywin watched, arms folded behind his back, uncaring as the boy seemed ready to dissolve into quiet sobs. If the Lord of Castle Rock felt any sympathy, he did not show it openly. Instead, his calculating gaze shifted to Rhaegar. Your brother's death is a tragedy, he said, each word measured. The realm will demand answers. King Aerys will demand blood. Rhaegar tore his damp eyes away to stare at Tywin. My father will accuse you, Lord Tywin, he said bluntly. You are your allies. In his eyes, everyone who defies him is complicit. The prince's voice was raw with bitterness and grief. He crumpled the raven's message in one fist. I should have been there, he murmured. I could have protected Viserys. Cersei almost felt pity for Rhaegar then. Almost. He looked truly lost, guilt and sorrow warring on his handsome face. For all his famed composure, this news had pierced him deeply. She recalled the boy Viserys, a little golden-headed princeling of barely 7 years. What was it like to lose a brother, to lose a son? She didn't want to know. May she never. And now Viserys was gone. Cersei felt a pang of sympathy for the queen and for Rhaegar, but she also felt a cold ripple of dread. Who could have done this? Whoever is responsible will answer for it, Tywin replied, his quiet voice cutting through the hall. In due time. He glanced around and noted the looks being exchanged, suspicious, uncertain. The Lannister guards and bannermen present remained stoic, but in their eyes he could see questions unspoken. Could Aerys have done this himself, in one of his fits of madness? Or had someone within the Red Keep taken matters into their own hands? Some might even whisper that Queen Raella had plotted to kill her own son, to spite her hated husband or to hasten his downfall. He knew how quickly rumors took root in a crisis. Enough, Joanna said firmly, her gaze sweeping the assembled onlookers. The prince has lost a brother. Give us a moment. At Lady Joanna's bidding, the courtiers and guards began to disperse. Tywin nodded once, dismissing the rest of his household retainers with a flick of his hand. Soon only the family and their closest confidants remained by the hearth. Rhaegar still stood by the fire, staring into the flames as if he might find answers there. Cersei moved carefully towards him. Prince Rhaegar, she said softly, I am truly sorry. Viserys, he was a sweet boy. We all. Rhaegar turned to her, anguish etched in every line of his face. He was all I had left of my siblings, he said hoarsely. The last of them. He placed a hand over his face, and for a moment Cersei thought he might weep. But when his hand fell away, his expression had hardened to cold determination. This cannot go unanswered. It won't, Tywin assured him before he could begin flinging accusations. But we must be cautious. The prince bridled, cautious, in these times. Tywin met his glare stoically. Aerys will blame us no matter what we do. We should expect a response from King's Landing within days, if not hours. And can you say with all honesty that you had no part in this? Cersei hissed. Rhaegar. Lady Joanna remained composed, as always. We did not. Cersei bit her lip, but if Lyanna and Elia were found here, they might well be blamed, if not taken into custody outright. Emotions were running high, and the prince was clearly looking for someone to blame. A baron had secreted them out the castle to safety, she could only pray that they'd found shelter in Lannisport or somewhere nearby. And the dragons. They couldn't possibly hide in that burrow forever. They had to eat. Gods be good, but they needed the prince gone. And soon. Tywin's mouth set in a grim line. The raven's message came with King Aerys's seal. We must assume it speaks with his voice. He accuses his enemies. That might mean me, or Prince Rhaegar. Rhaegar lifted his chin, suspicion momentarily deflected. My father will believe what he wishes. I had no part in this. How could I? I've been here for days. If he thinks you have betrayed him by attempting to court my daughter. Cersei bridled in remembrance and Rhaegar quickly glanced away. I understand, he muttered, shamefaced. My brother's death will only feed his paranoia. Cersei touched her bandaged palm unconsciously, feeling the sting from the night before. In all the chaos of the morning, she had nearly forgotten the other looming danger, the dragon's egg that still sat smoldering in her chamber hearth. She had not yet had the chance to tell her parents of Rhaegar's folly in bringing that egg here. And now, with Viserys' death, the conversation had derailed entirely. But the egg was still a problem, a potentially catastrophic one. One crisis at a time, she told herself. First, Viserys. Tywin addressed Rhaegar firmly. My prince, you will remain here at the Rock under our protection until we understand the king's next move. It's safer for all. Lest he suffer a convenient accident on the road. Rhaegar hesitated. He was a proud man, Cersei knew, and unused to following Tywin Lannister's commands. But he seemed to recognize the wisdom in the advice. Slowly, he inclined his head. Very well, for now. Joanna gave a small, relieved nod. Good. The last thing we need is you riding to King's Landing alone. Your father cannot be reasoned with in this state. Better to let him stew behind his walls. Tywin looked at Joanna. See to the ravens. I want to know how this news is received in the rest of the realm. Especially in the north and the riverlands. We will move only with careful thought. She bowed her, yes, husband. Cersei glanced back to Rhaegar, still concerned. The prince had quieted for the moment, but there was an anger in his eyes. What was the saying about Targaryens and madness? The gods flip a coin. 0.0.0.0. As he stalked the corridors of the Red Key, Jaime's mind churned. Viserys dead, and by poison. Who could have done such a thing? He thought of King Aerys's gloating sneer on the throne. The Mad King would twist this tragedy to serve his madness, no doubt, screaming for vengeance. Aerys would name Tywin and all Lannisters as black-hearted usurpers and murderers. That was predictable. But Jaime found his thoughts turning back to Queen Raella. A terrible, insidious question flickered in his mind, one he wished he could snuff out. Could she have been involved? The idea seemed unthinkable. Raella loved her children dearly, Jaime had seen that with his own eyes. Yet, she hated her brother-husband Aerys as well, with good reason. And desperate times bred desperate acts. He recalled a conversation with Raella some nights past, as he stood guard outside her chamber. In a hushed, haunted voice she had spoken of her son Viserys, wondering if he would go mad, just like his father and his brother. They say the Red Keep is a pit of snakes, Raella had whispered to him through the cracked door, too anxious to sleep. Who's to say Viserys isn't one already? Make no mistake, Rhaegar was mad, but in a different manner than his father. The prince remained obsessed with prophecy, the dragon's 3 heads. Jaime disdained prophecies as a whole, such was why he and Nathaniel had kept Cersei from seeing that mad witch long ago. And secretly made sure father disposed of said witch to ensure Cersei never paid her a visit in the future. The future was a madness all its own. Best not to know it. Ignorance was bliss. And presently the future was looking dark indeed. Jaime had tried to assure Raella that her second son would be well protected by the guards, HWR ladies and by Varys's little spies, at least until they could contrive a way to smuggle him to safety. At the mention of the Master of Whisperers, Raella's face had become unreadable. Now the boy was dead and Jaime felt a chill at the thought. Had the Queen's fears led her to some dire choice? Perhaps a secret missive to Varys, urging him to spirit Viserys out of King's Landing, but instead, had the eunuch delivered poison. Varys was cunning beyond measure, but was he that cruel? Was he? In the end, his boots carried him to Raella's room. Jaime did not want to believe the Queen could be part of such a plot. But he needed to hear it from her own lips, for his own peace of mind, if nothing else. He found himself striding not toward the rookery, but back toward the solar where Raella often spent her afternoons. His duty could wait a few minutes. This was more important. Sure enough found Queen Raella alone in the solar, just as she was dismissing her handmaids in a voice thick with tears. Through the arched window, the late morning sun painted a square of light on the stone floor. Raella turned at his approach, quickly wiping at her eyes. Her cheeks were blotchy from crying. Queen Raella Targaryen, sister-wife to the Mad King and mother to his children, sat in a cushioned chair by the window, her slender hands clenched white in her lap. Jaime stood tense at the Queen's side. His sword hand twitched as if he wished he could cut down the invisible foe who had done this deed. He remembered Prince Viserys, a cheerful, curious child who would tug at his Kingsguard cloak and begged for piggyback rides around the Red Keep's gardens. Jaime swallowed hard. The image of that innocent boy lying cold and still made his stomach clench in anger. His shoulders sagged. He looked stricken, as though struggling to reconcile the news with reality. "Your Grace," he began, stepping toward Raella. But Raella suddenly turned away from him, pressing a hand to her mouth. A keening sound escaped her lips, a mother's anguish-given voice. She swayed where she sat, and Jaime hurried to her side. "Your Grace." Raella only shook her head, face crumpling anew. He was just a child. Jaime's heart ached at the sight. Raella had already endured so much, the cruelties of her husband, the terror of his madness, the uncertainty of these desperate alliances and with it the hope of a better future. Now the death of her son was one more lash on an already bleeding back. He longed to say some word of comfort, but found his knees buckled. Reluctantly, he laid a hand on her knee. Raella looked up at him. "Sir Jaime," she said softly. "Forgive me, I needed a moment." Pivoting, he marched back to the entrance and closed the heavy oak door behind him, ensuring they would not be overheard. "Your Grace." He inclined his head respectfully. "I won't take much of your time." Raella gave a faint, sad smile. "You have given me so much of your time already. Your loyalty to my family has not gone unnoticed." Her voice caught slightly. She had been about to say, "our family," as if including Jaime among her loved ones. Nathaniel's work, no doubt. His baby brother was a sly one. He envied him his wit. He could use a clever quip to cheer her up about now. Instead, he was forced to steel himself and speak of harsher things. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "My queen, I wish there were words I could offer to ease your pain. Prince Viserys' death is a terrible loss." He paused, knowing he tread on dangerous ground. "But I fear there will be dark rumors. King Aerys, others, they will seek someone to blame. Raella's eyes searched his face. You mean me, she said flatly, though her lips trembled. Jaime flushed. She had always been perceptive. Not I, he said quickly. I do not believe it of you, your grace. But some might whisper, that you had a hand in this. They will say kinslaying is an accursed sin. His own words tasted foul. 7 hells, this was a delicate matter. How could he even ask? And you, Raella's voice wavered, do you also wonder if I killed my own brother's son? My own flesh and blood? Her brother's son, an odd, formal way to refer to Viserys, who was her son as well. But Jaime understood. Viserys was Aerys's child as much as hers, and Raella had long ceased to think of Aerys as anything but a monster wearing her brother's face. Was it any wonder then, that she had so little love for her children? Jaime dropped to one knee before her, golden head bowed. Your grace, I ask not out of malice. But because if you know anything, about what really happened, it could mean the difference between war and peace. I will not judge, I only. Raella let out a shuddering sob. Jaime Lannister, look at me. He obeyed, gazing up into her anguished face and saw the tears tumbling freely down her cheeks now. That was my son, my little boy, she choked out. Do you think me so monstrous as to harm him? Jaime felt a stab of shame. No, my queen, I do not. I had to ask, only to quell the talk. She cut him off, suddenly kneeling down so that they were face to face, queen and knight on the same level. She seized Jaime's hand in both of hers, her fingers were icy despite the warmth of the day. I loved Viserys, Raella said, each word emphatic. Whatever anyone says of me, whatever Aerys screams to the heavens, know that I would have never sanctioned this. I wanted to send him to those who could care for him as I could not. Not bury him. Jaime believed her. The raw honesty of her grief was unmistakable. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. Truly, I had to ask. Fresh tears coursed down Raella's face, but her purple eyes suddenly hardened with fury. It was him, wasn't it? She hissed, anger flickering amid the sorrow. Jaime realized she did not mean Aerys. The spider, she clarified, voice low and venomous. Varys promised me my son would be safe and well protected, that he wouldn't become a monster. He swore it, and now Viserys is dead. Jaime frowned. Varys, the master of whisperers, why would he? To accelerate his timeline, I suspect. Raella almost spat the words. Bitterness twisted her lovely features. Varys sees my husband as unstable, and the prince with him, he wants to hurry along whatever web he's been weaving. Or perhaps one of Tywin's schemes. Who can say? Viserys was but a pawn to them. She squeezed Jaime's hand so tightly it hurt. Mark my words, my poor boy was murdered to set the realm aflame, and Varys was pulling the strings. I feel it in my heart. Jaime had no love for Varys, the man was as slippery as an eel, but this was a dangerous accusation. We have no proof, he cautioned gently. Raella released his hand, slumping slightly. No, we do not. Her fury deflated, leaving only sorrow and exhaustion. She looked so small then, despite her renewed youth, kneeling there with her shoulders bowed. And we likely never will. The truth is hidden behind 1,000 whispers, and my son's killer will hide among them. Gently, Jaime reached out and rested a hand on Raella's shoulder. You should rest, your grace. We will find justice for Viserys in due time. I swear it. Raella closed her eyes. A tear clung to her lashes before falling. Thank you, Jaime. Perhaps, shall find some solace in my dreams. He helped her back to her feet. For a moment, Raella Targaryen leaned against him like a weary willow bending toward a sturdy oak. You are a good man, she murmured. Better than most, better than my own kin, it seems. She stepped back, regaining a measure of composure. Go, do your duty, I will survive. Jaime bowed deeply. As he withdrew from the solar, he cast one last glance at the grieving mother, now standing alone in a shaft of sunlight. Her hands were clasped before her as if in prayer, and her lips moved soundlessly, perhaps speaking a final goodbye to little Viserys. Jaime silently vowed he would uphold his promise. Whoever had done this would face a lion's wrath, someday. Someday. 0.0.0.0. Across Westeros, the news flew on raven's wings, eliciting shock and speculation in every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. In the taverns of Lannisport, merchants gossiped that the Targaryen boy had been slain by vengeful spirits as justice for the Mad King's sins. On the streets of King's Landing, small folk spoke in hushed tones of dark magic and cursed blood, while gold cloaks barked at them to move along. Some claimed the boy had simply succumbed to a summer fever, but far more believed some foul plot was afoot. One rumor suggested the prince had been found foaming at the mouth, his face turned as purple as a ripe plum, a sure sign of poisoning. Another whispered that a dagger was seen slipping out of his nursery window that night. Among the high lords and ladies, the whispers were more guarded but no less fevered. At Riverrun, Lord Hoster Tully read the Raven's note twice over, then murmured to his maester that the damnable Lannisters must have a long reach indeed, if poison could find its way into the Red Keep. In the Eyrie, young Jon Arryn furrowed his brow and wondered aloud to his new bride Lisa what this meant for the rebellion brewing in the west. In the shadow of the wall, Lord Commander Corgyle received only a snippet of the news, Prince dead, treachery suspected, and sighed, knowing it spelled more chaos for a realm already unsteady. At Storm's End, Robert Baratheon's booming voice echoed in the hall as he cursed the Targaryens to the seven hells. Poison, bah, better the whelp died now than grow up to be another mad dragon, he was overheard saying after quaffing a horn of ale. His more level-headed brother Stannis only pressed his lips thin, muttering something about coward's work, and wondered who truly stood to gain. Winterfell remained silent, its lord away and seen to by a steward, but the Northerners were an honorable lot and they disdained this talk of poison all the same. Across the land, tongues wagged and ravens flew. By dusk that day, every tavern from the arbor to the last hearth hummed with the tale of the Targaryen prince's sudden demise. Some foretold it was a dark omen of more death to come. Others toasted the news, declaring it one less dragon to fear. Either way, the winds of chaos were rising. 0.0.0.0 Far to the west, on a rocky isle still smoldering with the aftermath of war, Nathaniel Lannister knew nothing of these sudden shifts in the Game of Thrones. Upon the ruins of Pike's great keep, he stood beneath a sky of slate gray, staring out over the churning iron sea. Salt and ash scented the damp breeze. Behind him, the ancient stronghold of House Greyjoy lay in blackened, blood-soaked rubble. Naruto, the name only his closest kin used, though in the privacy of his own mind he still answered to it, breathed in deeply and closed his eyes. The cries of carrion gulls and the distant crash of waves were the only sounds now. 3 days of blood and fire had brought silence at last. The Iron Islands campaign was over. No survivors. And so it had been done. The Greyjoy banner, a golden kraken on a field of black, now lay trampled and torn amid the debris, drenched in the blood of Balon Greyjoy and his kin. The rebellious krakens had been smashed beneath the lion's claws. He opened his eyes and gazed down the cliffside. Far below, in Pike's harbor, the sea still foamed red with slaughter. The wrecks of longships jutted from the shallows like broken bones. Corpses bobbed in the surf. His stomach turned at the sight, though he had seen such carnage before. Not far off, curled up against a collapsed section of wall, was an immense heap of flesh and scales, shuddering with every breath. The men were already telling wild tales of that beast, dubbing it the Leviathan. They said it answered only to the golden air of Castle Rock, that it was some dark magic he had unleashed upon the Ironborn. Nathaniel almost laughed at the absurdity, if any laughter could find him in this bleak moment. If only they knew, he thought, shaking his head. The Leviathan had been no demon's work at all, but simply Isobu, the great turtle-like titan from a world no Westerosi could imagine reborn as this great sea beast. A remnant of his past life's power he rarely used openly, but on the unforgiving waves of battle, he'd made an exception. Just this morning, he'd slaughtered an entire pod of humpback whales, feasted, and gone to sleep. Nymeria seemed rather proud of that, not that he could blame her. He had ridden into war upon the back of a giant, and helped end House Greyjoy in one fell stroke. Now the songs would hail him as some mythical hero or damned sorcerer, perhaps both. It all felt strangely hollow. A familiar voice at his shoulder jolted him from his thoughts. "Esser, the ship is ready." Nathaniel turned to see Esser Kevin Lannister, his uncle, standing there with an anxious expression. Behind Kevin, a handful of Lannister guards waited by the winding path that led down to the bay. The men looked exhausted and drenched from the sea spray, but victory had put a weary pride in their eyes. "Thank you, Uncle," Nathaniel replied quietly. He cast one last glance out to sea. The horizon was beginning to clear. Far to the east, a pale sunbeam broke through the clouds. It was time to go home. As they walked down the charred steps of Pike's fortress, Kevin cleared his throat. "We'll have a few days' sail back to Lannisport if the winds hold. I suspect my brother will want a full account of this campaign." Nathaniel grimaced. Campaign. Such a polite word for the massacre they had wrought. "I'll tell father everything," he said. "The good and the ill." Kevin eyed him sidelong. "Not all of it was ill, Nathaniel. You won a great victory here. The Ironborn won't threaten the western coast again for a long time, perhaps not ever. No, Nathaniel agreed, they won't. He fell silent as they passed by a shattered tower. Within the collapsed ruins he could see twisted shapes, bodies burned beyond recognition. Perhaps Greyjoy men, perhaps their families. His jaw tightened. Tell me, uncle, did we truly need to kill them all? Kevin hesitated. He lowered his voice. That was your mother's command. By mother, he meant Lady Joanna. She and your father agreed. No chance of vengeance left alive. No second Greyjoy rebellion in a generation's time. A lesson written in blood, like Castamer. A lesson written in blood. Nathaniel closed his eyes for a moment, pushing down a surge of nausea. He had objected to that order when it was given, but Tywin and Joanna had overruled him. He was their weapon, to be aimed where they decided. And he had obeyed, albeit reluctantly. The Greyjoys were no friend to us, he said, voice rough. Balon made his choice when he rose against the Iron Throne while the realm was distracted. I only wish. He trailed off. I only wish it hadn't been so brutal. He wished Nymeria had told him of the butchery she would commit, if only so he could caution her against it. Too late now, the deed was done. No heir of Balon would remain. It sickened him still. Kevin put a hand on his nephew's shoulder, gentle. You spared the small folk of the Isles, he offered quietly. They surrendered, and you let them live. That mercy will be remembered. Mercy. Ruthlessness is mercy upon ourselves. If only he could believe such. Nathaniel gave a bitter snort. Small comfort. Mercy or not, the Islanders would remember the Leviathan and the blood and smoke far more vividly than any small mercy. To them, he might forever be the golden demon who unleashed hell on Pike. They reached the shoreline. A longboat bobbed in the surf, ready to ferry them to the flagship. The wind carried the cries of gulls and the faint sobbing of a handful of Ironborn widows kneeling over corpses farther down the strand. Nathaniel forced himself not to look away from their grief. This is the cost, he reminded himself. Never forget this cost. Any word from Castle Rock? He asked Kevin as they boarded the small boat. Kevin shook his head, stepping carefully into the craft. No ravens reached us here. But you know how unreliable communication can be during wartime. We'll surely learn the latest when we land at Lannisport. Nathaniel simply nodded, though a strange unease tugged at him. He realized he had been utterly cut off from the intrigues of the realm while focusing on this island war. What might have happened in his absence? Was the Mad King still holed up behind his walls, screaming at shadows? Was Jaime keeping out his grasp? Was Raella still waiting for him in his dreams? Uneasy terms with Tywin, and what of his other siblings, Cersei and Tyrion? For all he knew, King's Landing could have gone up in Dragonfire and he'd only hear of it upon arrival. The thought made him anxious to be home. As the longboat was rowed out to the waiting ship, Nathaniel turned his face eastward. Across leagues of restless ocean lay the mainland and, beyond that, his family. Cersei. Her name flickered through his mind and warmed him slightly against the chill. He wondered what she was doing now, probably rolling her eyes at some lordling's flattery or sparring with their father's plans. He allowed himself a small smile at the thought. He had missed her sharp tongue these past weeks. And Lyanna, she was probably going stir-crazy in the courtyard, to say nothing of Elia. Unbidden, another face floated in his memory, Raella's tearful smile when he had bidden her farewell in his dreams before sailing west. Please come back, she'd said, holding his hand perhaps a moment longer than propriety allowed. Despite her own troubles, she had fretted for his safety. He had promised her he would return, too. There was much to do, and little time to do it. Nymeria was waiting for him on the vessel, a swagger in her step. Time to wake the beast, then. He supposed so. Humming once, he craned his neck toward the ruin of Pike and whistled sharply, enhancing the sound with his chakra. Isobu reacted instantly. Moving with speed that bellied his bulk, he unfurled in an instant, accidentally toppling a sundered tower and dove beneath the waves with a happy cry. We're coming back, Naruto whispered under his breath now, as the oarsman pulled in steady rhythm. Salt spray dusted his golden hair. Back to where I'm needed. For though the Iron Islands were secured, he could not shake the feeling that the true storm was still to come, one he would face not on some distant isle, but at the very heart of the Seven Kingdoms. Someone was going to die. He wasn't quite sure why he had that feeling, save that he did. Naruto felt it in his bones, he wasn't sure who, only that someone would. He craned his neck back, watching Isobu surge toward their ships, done sleeping in the shallows and eager for human contact once more. Nymeria crooned and waved his way, delighted as he swept up beside their vessel, much to the dismay of several sailors. She absolutely adored Isobu and lived to lavish attention upon him. The sea serpent noticed her delight, naturally. Good, he could use a friend. Still didn't stop him from rearing up out of the water and demanding headpats, though. Uncle Kevin sighed sullenly somewhere behind them. Bloody big beast, how do you intend to explain that creature to your father? Naruto hummed and scratched the Leviathan's scales. You leave that to me. It would be nice to finally have a proper weapon against Aerys. Kurama and the rest might still be growing and they'd probably pitch a fit once they saw their comrade, but as for Isobu himself, if he grew bigger than this, well. Let's see the mad dragon send a fleet against us now. Pressing his head to his old friend's damp scales, he chuckled softly. Ready to raise some hell. Always, as ever his words were for his ears and his alone. I look forward to lording this victory over my little kin. Don't go calling Kurama that, he'll never forgive you. The other sailors were afraid of him, and rightfully so. In his new form, the Sanbi could gobble them up, easily, snap their ships in half with a single bite. He truly was a Leviathan. Nymeria sidled up beside him, hip brushing his. For a moment he thought she was going to try and lead him down below deck again, but no, her eyes were fixed firmly upon Isobu. He had an inkling of what she was about to ask. Indeed, he wasn't disappointed. May I ride him? Here at last, Naruto permitted himself a small smile. That depends. She tilted her head. On how long you can hold your breath. Nymeria evidently took that as a challenge. She vaulted off the ship, landed on Isobu's back and scaled him like a mountain. In a matter of moments she'd settled atop his head, claiming him. Challenge accepted, my lord Tilda. Isobu trilled his agreement with a roar to rattle the words. I like this human. She understands. I'm keeping her. 0.0.0.0. Ghastly Rock's forbidding silhouette emerged from the morning mist like a slumbering giant as their ship finally neared Lannisport's harbor. The voyage had taken the better part of 3 days, yet to Nathaniel it felt like an eternity. Each hour homeward had stoked his impatience. He'd paced the deck whenever he wasn't poring over maps or writing reports of the battle to send ahead by Raven. But one by one, none of his ravens returned, lost to a fierce storm on the second day, so he arrived unannounced, unsummoned, and uncertain of what news might await him beyond the horizon. It was early morning as he rowed hard from the Lannisport docks up the winding road toward Ghastly Rock. The bay was still dotted with the charred hulks of ironborn longships, grim trophies from Pike's rebellion, hauled here to Lannisport to display before they were burnt to ash. The smell of distant smoke hung faint in the air even here. But at least the lands of the west were peaceful. As Nathaniel galloped through the Lion's Gate and into the main courtyard, servants and guards gaped at the sudden arrival of the heir of the rock, dust-caked and travel-worn but very much alive. Nathaniel swung down from his lathered horse and tossed the reins to a stable hand, barely pausing before striding into the castle proper. A guard captain hurried to approach, bowing deeply. My lord, we did not know you were so close. Where is my father? Naruto interrupted, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the entry hall. Or my mother? Is the court assembled? The guard blinked. Lord Tywin is in council with the Lady Joanna and Prince Rhaegar. What? Rhaegar. Naruto stopped in his tracks, too stunned to frown. Why was he here? Why would he be here? Why could he? His blood ran cold. Lyanna. Elia. Shit. Had they gotten away? Were they in hiding? Oh gods, Kurama, the other dragons. Rhaegar couldn't be here. Moreover, something in the guard's tone set him on edge. And my sister, Lady Cersei. I believe she is in her chambers, my lord, answered the guard. He hesitated, eyeing Nathaniel's mud-splattered cloak. Shall I send word of your arrival to Lord Tywin? He shook his head curtly to suppress his growing rages. That won't be necessary. I'll see them presently. His heart was pounding faster now. Cersei, and Rhaegar still here. Why did that combination unsettle him so? Carry on, he told the guard, already moving past. He took the steps 2 at a time toward the family's private quarters. The castle felt eerily still in the early hour. Only a few servants bustled about, tending to morning chores. As he ascended a spiral stair, a whiff of smoke reached his nose. Wood smoke, and something else, something metallic or sulphurous. He quickened his pace. Cersei's chambers lay at the end of the corridor on the 3rd floor. As he rounded the final turn, he nearly collided with a young maid carrying an empty coal scuttle. The girl dropped into a flustered curtsy. Beg pardon, my lord. Nathaniel steadied her by the elbow. What's that smell? Is there a fire burning here? The maid's eyes flickered nervously to the heavy oak door at the corridor's end. Thin tendrils of grey smoke curled out from under it. Only the hearth, Esser. Her ladyship, she keeps it fed day and night of late. The girl bit her lip. I was just cleaning out the old ashes. Before he could ask more, raised voices from within Cersei's chambers made him tense. A man's voice, heated and urgent. A woman's voice answering in quiet fury. Even muffled by the door, he knew them, Rhaegar. And Cersei. Naruto was moving before thought. He crossed the corridor in 3 quick strides. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, firelight flickered. He could hear Cersei clearly now, her tone sharp as a dagger's edge. You have no idea what you're tampering with. She spat. I only seek to do what must be done, came Rhaegar's voice, hard with frustration. Nathaniel pushed the door wide and took in the scene at a glance. Cersei and Rhaegar stood facing each other in front of the great stone hearth. Flames roared in the fireplace, hotter and higher than any simple warming fire should be. And in the heart of that fire, nestled among glowing coals, was a large dragon's egg, its scaled surface shimmering red gold in the heat. It was immediately forgotten as he saw the state of his sister. Cersei's golden hair was disheveled, her cheeks flushed. Ash smeared her hands and forearms. Her emerald green gown was singed and the sleeve at her right shoulder had been torn, dangling by threads. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes even as she glared at Rhaegar in defiance. Rhaegar himself looked distraught, one hand reaching toward the egg in the flames and the other grasping Cersei firmly by her wrist as if to hold her back. You utter fool, Cersei snarled, trying to yank free from his grip. Do you know what you've done? Let go of me, I have to fix this. Cersei, please, Rhaegar implored, his voice cracking. You're hurt, look at your hands, if you'd just let me help. I neither want nor require your help. Her hands. 7 save him. Cersei's hands were raw red, blistered from palm to fingertip. Naruto took all this in an instant, and immediately jumped to his first conclusion. What would any brother do upon seeing his sister in such a state? Something deep inside him snapped. Get away from her. Both Cersei and Rhaegar started in surprise at the sudden voice. Rhaegar released Cersei's wrist and spun toward the door towards him. But Nathaniel was already moving, closing the distance with the deadly speed of a leaping lion. Brother, Cersei gasped in disbelief, too startled to say anything else. She staggered back against the mantel, cradling her burned hands. Rhaegar barely managed to open his mouth. Whether in explanation or protest, it mattered not. Fury and alarm hammered in Nathaniel's chest at the sight of his sister's tears, her torn dress, her scorched skin. In that moment he saw not a prince of royal blood, but a threat. An enemy. He saw Rhaegar's hand on Cersei, saw pain in her eyes, and nothing else. His fist clenched and flew, driven by instinct and rage. Rhaegar had no time to dodge. Naruto's punch caught him full on the jaw with a crack like a thunderbolt. The prince was lifted off his feet and hurled backward as if by a giant's strength. Rhaegar crashed into Cersei's heavy oaken table, and the wood exploded under him with a tremendous splintering sound. Dishes of untouched breakfast and a flagon of wine went flying. The prince's silver head struck the floor amid the wreckage, and he lay there in a heap of crimson cloak and shattered oak, very still. A thin line of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth onto the stones. Silence fell over the room, save for the roar of the fire and Cersei's ragged breathing. Naruto stood over the fallen prince, chest heaving. Slowly, the red haze of wrath ebbed from his vision. He flexed the fingers of his right hand. They tingled, and a sharp pain told him 1 or 2 knuckles had split on Rhaegar's teeth. He hardly cared. Cersei had pressed herself against the stone mantel, eyes wide. Ash smudged her tear-streaked face. The front of her green silk dress was ripped at the shoulder seam, where Rhaegar's grasp or her own struggle had torn it. She stared at her brother and then at Rhaegar's limp form, disbelief warring with a strange relief. Nathaniel, she breathed at last. She took a halting step forward, as if to approach him, then her gaze fell to Rhaegar's unconscious form and she froze. Her question fell into the silence like the final echo of a thunderclap. What have you done? Raella stared Naruto down intently, violet eyes brighter than her namesake. I understood you struck my son. He heaved a heavy sigh, bowing his head low in defeat. I did. The queen blinked back, just the once. Might I ask why? I thought he was trying to assault Cersei. And? He tilted his head. And what? Just how hard did you strike the prince? A chagrined look crossed his visage as he confirmed her concern. Knocked him out. A moment of silence followed. An eternity of quiet. And then, Raella snorted, a decidedly unladylike noise that sounded more at home with a peasant girl than the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Said snort became a snicker, one she struggled to smother behind her right hand, to no avail. In a matter of moments she dissolved into helpless giggles, shoulders shaking as she failed to contain her mirth. She couldn't help herself. After the devastating news she'd received only a short while ago, something like this was a breath of fresh air. Tell me more. She latched onto Nathaniel's Naruto's shoulders for dear life before he paramour could finish relaying the news to her. What noise did he make? What did he look like? What was his expression? Here at last, the Lion of Lannister dared a small smile. He gawped like a fish and flopped to the floor like one. And you're certain you didn't kill him? Completely. He waved a hand. Pycelle says he'll alive. As for what comes after, who knows? Raella squirmed happily, still holding on to her love. It wasn't the same as someone slugging her hated husband. How gauche of her to phrase it as such, but at this point, she'd take what she could get. Rhaegar's head was full of prophecies and dreams, stories of the old days and the glories that came with it. Someone should have smacked him upside the head long ago. He never could take a punch. She tutted, gracing Nathaniel's cheek with a quick kiss before he could protest against her words. Aerys often ordered his instructors to hold back whenever he sparred with them. When one swordmaster dared to strike him during practice, the king had his hand lopped off in recompense. I suspect Rhaegar's tutelage suffered for it. Her blonde leaned back, bemused. You do realize this is your son we're talking about? She grinned impishly in return. And hearing how you laid him low has brought me great pleasure. Naruto leaned into her and rested his head against her shoulder. Unsatisfied with that, Raella dragged him into her lap and looped both arms around his waist, holding him fast. The fact that he allowed such, even in a dream, spoke to his frustration. He was usually far more composed than this, downright reserved even. The incident with Rhaegar, not her son, never her son by choice, forced upon her by Aerys, must have rattled him badly. She could see it in his eyes. Today's dream was a pleasant picnic, one held on the distant isle of a land whose name she couldn't pronounce, just the two of them sitting idly by the sea, letting the water lap at their feet. It brought her great comfort to spend time with her long-lost love. He may as well have been for all the time he'd spent at sea, like this, simply basking in his presence. Not so Naruto. His actions were weighing on him like a lead chain, dragging his very thought down. I acted impulsively. He dragged a hand across his face. It was stupid of me. Raella didn't answer. Yes, perhaps it was foolish of him to attack Rhaegar, yet she couldn't help but find that side of him somewhat endearing. The notion of him leaping into action the moment he perceived one of his lady loves to be in danger painted a rather gallant picture indeed. She'd long since considered him her knight, but his actions and honesty today only served to further solidify her certainty. It also left her mightily aroused if she was entirely honest with herself, which she was, and made her want to quit King's Landing altogether, seize the fastest horse she could, and ride to Castle Rock. Sir Jaime could and would cut her a path to freedom if she but asked. Only the knowledge of the chaos she would cause, the blame for Viserys' death that would undoubtedly be cast upon her, and the war which would follow that prevented her from doing so. Absence made the heart fonder, or so the saying went. She was going to fondly pin him to the ground and ravage him the moment they met in person. Naruto looked to her for guidance, just a shade shy of despair. I've started a war. You did no such thing. Raella took him by the face and pressed her lips to his in a brief kiss, silencing his doubts, smothering them before they could take form before drawing away. If Rhaegar is so easily offended as to declare war after a single strike, then he is no true dragon. And even should he do so, you have the right of it. He tried to take your sister. You said so yourself. But he wasn't doing that, Naruto protested. Not really. It was a misunderstanding. It was. She nodded her agreement, but the realm doesn't know that, does it? Many will believe what they wish to believe. He turned aside, displeased. It feels dirty. War is seldom clean, my love. Speaking of which, shaking his head, he looked away. I'm sorry about Viserys. He didn't deserve to die. Raella shivered a little at the reminder. It's not your fault. Still meant what I said. The queen felt heart clench anew. What to say to that? What could she even say? Perhaps it was better for the poor boy to be dead, cruel as that might sound. This way he wouldn't grow up in a realm riven by war, wouldn't live to resent her for the betrayal she would soon commit, nor the inheritance he would be denied. She had wept for the boy he should have been, for the man he might have become, but in the end, she had shed all the tears she could. He was a good child, a pure soul, innocent and untainted, surely he'd gone straight to the Seven. Varys, if the Master of Whispers was indeed at fault, would be called to account for his death. Meanwhile, the king was crumbling more every day. It merely remained to see what he took within before he fell. Aerys would die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but her so-called husband would not live to be an old man. That much had been determined. His dastardly days were numbered. Whether he succumbed to the mysterious illness ravaging his body, lost himself to madness entire, or simply tripped down the stairs and broke his neck. But the Lannisters could not be seen as the villains, for if the lion were to usurp the dragon, then they must be the heroes of this tale. To that end, there was no length she wouldn't go to see it so. The rejuvenated queen tutted softly, considering the matter a moment more. Naruto noticed, naturally's, Rhae. She spun him around and settled her hands on his shoulders, the better to distract both him and herself from the discord in her heart. I'll have another child someday, she reassured him. But not with Aerys. Her lion went still, but she didn't miss the spark of hope in his eyes. She'd tempted him with the notion many a time before, yet rarely said it aloud. Perhaps this was something they both needed to hear. Raella leaned in to whisper against his ear. How does the name Daenerys strike you? He regarded her warily, intently, almost hopefully. It sounds lovely. Good. It will be the name of our daughter. Raella preened and leaned into him, guiding him to the ground. Now let us dwell no more on the past and focus on the future. Have you decided what will you do? He exhaled harshly, steeling himself as he made to stand and end the dream. What must be done? Seems I'll have to play the villain, after all. She drew him back into her embrace, nuzzling his neck. You needn't. He frowned at her, mildly incredulous by her claim. How so? Raella whispered an idea to her love. And he smiled. Tilda. Sometimes, Tywin feared for his children. He was not afraid of them, mind you, but rather he feared what would become of them once he was gone. With every year he and Joanna grew older, and while they still had time left in this world, he confessed some small concern as to the legacy his children might leave behind. Some more than most. Tyrion would be safe. He seemed to be outgrowing his deformity, strange as that might sound, and Cersei remained safe for now, while Jaime's ultimate fate, and possibly his chance to escape the Kingsguard altogether, would be determined in the coming months. They, at least for now, were secure. Ah, but Nathaniel. Nathaniel. His air was so very like him as a young man, full of cold steel and iron resolve, willing to do what was necessary when it was necessary, but he had his mother's temper and heart that all too often led him into trouble. Case in point. He encountered his son just as he left his chambers. He didn't look well rested in the least. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, a sure sign of a lack of sleep, or perhaps other, more worrying concerns. Cersei had mentioned that he didn't seem to be sleeping properly these last few days, but here and now, seeing it for himself, his immediate concerns were made manifest. Tywin coughed into a fist to announce his presence. Nathaniel jolted a little, looking guilty for not noticing him early. Father, good morning. Tywin cut to the chase. The prince will awaken soon. Nathaniel barely reacted. Will he now? Rhaegar had been asleep for the better part of 2 days now, and while the maester reassured them he would recover, it was anyone's guess as to the state he'd be in. His eyelids had been fluttering as of late, and he was said to have been muttering strange things in his sleep. That was worrying enough, but no, his true concern lay with Nathaniel, what he might do once the prince recovered fully. Nathaniel met his stare and grunted. I'm not sorry. Good. You shouldn't be. Tywin planted a hand on his shoulder. You believed you were protecting the family. Misunderstandings happen. The prince will realize this. His son looked away. So long as he doesn't touch Cersei again. So there was a speck of honor in him yet, no matter. So long as it remained just that. His concern for his sister proved touching, but also troubling. They had been spending a great deal of time together as of late, more than ever since Elia and Lyanna had gone into hiding. Perhaps. No, he wouldn't speak of that for now, lest he will it into existence by acknowledging it. Kevin tells me you acquired a rather curious sea beast during your adventure. Nathaniel granted him a wry grin. Did I? Now, I know of no such beast. Son. His smile faded a touch, becoming more genuine. He's about. I expect to see him. His son chuckled. You will. And what of our prince's egg? Nathaniel smiled innocently. What egg? Tywin wasn't fooled for a moment. Don't be glib with me, boy. Cersei told me everything. What did you do with it? I won't let Rhaegar have it. That is not my concern. What did you do with it? His heir stood his ground and lifted his chin, staring him down. At length, Nathaniel smiled. It was not a nice smile, but a wicked thing promising mischief. I'm a faker, father. His clever son sketched a shallow bow, all wit and charm once more. You know that, and I've grown rather adept at creating forgeries of my own. Tilda. A day passed. The sun rose, and set. A sullen moon ascended, then fell. All this, with no sign of consciousness from the prince. On the dawn of the next day, however, in the wee hours of the morning, everything changed. Without a word, or a whisper, nor even a hint of warning, Rhaegar Targaryen opened his eyes with a gasp. Dark were Rhaegar's dreams. He saw so much, and yet comprehended so very little. Strange whispers tormented him in a language he couldn't hope to comprehend. If this were a vision, then he wished to see no more. If this were nightmare, he prayed for its end, one that never seemed to come. He could not, awaken despite his best efforts. His consciousness remained trapped by some unseen force, forced to watch as the everything around him descended into madness and anarchy. Faster and faster the horrors came without relent, driving him to the very precipice of madness. All the while he heard the voice of his Lord Father, snarling 3 words. Burn them all. He watched a castle fall into the sea. Burn them all. 9 dragons descended from the sky and burned Highgarden to the ground. Burn them all. Dire wolves howled as a wicked winder wind swept in from the north and smothered the realm beneath a blanket of ice. King's Landing detonated in a towering explosion of wildfire, taking Aerys with it. The Mad King was still screaming on his throne as he burnt alive. It didn't end there. The scene shifted and he saw himself, lying broken and beaten in the mud, chest caved in from an awful blow. A shadow loomed over him, weapon in hand. Stop, Rhaegar begged. No more. Please, have mercy. The blade stabbed down, bringing darkness. In that void he heard a melody, a haunting rhythm that somehow simultaneously chilled his blood and warmed his heart. A song of ice and fire. He could find no other for us, only the words that he knew in his heart. But soon enough even that song died, fading to darkness. And there in the gloom, gazing back at him. Eyes, but not just any eyes. Cold blue eyes. Suddenly there were more of them. A great many more, so many more, countless eyes gazing back at him from the gloom, one after the other. They shambled forward and he saw them, horrible things, dead things, things that shouldn't exist in this world. And there, in the center, a man made of ice, his eyes cold and haunting. Rhaegar stumbled back, clutching one hand to his chest. Who are you? This cruel creature of cold stared him down. It said not a word, for there was no need. It merely raised a hand. Without warning the dead swarmed forward, grasping at Rhaegar, ready to rip him apart. The prince screamed as he was torn asunder. Abruptly the world rushed back and he awoke with a start, leaving him gasping for breath, staring at a dark, paneled ceiling. His scalp ached violently, as though a giant hand had squeezed it. His mouth remained bitter with the tang of salt and bitter brew. For a long moment he lay still, gathering himself, trying to remember where he was and how he had come to be here. The last thing he could recall was a blur of motion and a shout, then darkness. Now he found himself sprawled upon a low velvet divan in an unfamiliar chamber, strewn with crimson and gold tapestries bearing the Lannister crest. Candlelight danced on lacquered walls. His hands were bandaged, blackened where dried blood seeped through, and at his side on a small table sat a basin of water and a chafing dish of healing salves. He forced himself to sit up, pushing back a tangle of pale hair. The sunlight, he groaned as light spilled over him. A young woman in a wine-colored dress was behind him, gently tending to his hands. Joanna Lannister, he suddenly remembered, Tywin Lannister's wife, stern lady of Castle Rock. Her fingers moved deftly over his bruised knuckles, whispering a calm encouragement as she worked. When Rhaegar's eyes finally lifted from his hands, they met Joanna's shrewd, pale gaze. She straightened, pale blonde hair falling in waves over her shoulders, and offered him a thin smile. "Your Grace," she said softly. "Good, you're finally awake." Rhaegar blinked, his mouth parched. He tried to swallow, but the movement sent a jolt of pain through his ribs. "Lady Joanna," he croaked, glancing around. Where am I?" A velvet-footed boy of about 7 stood nearby, holding a silver-gilded goblet, but beyond that he didn't see anyone else. Ah. Cersei Lannister, Joanna's daughter, Rhaegar's would-be ally and, as was to be hoped, his future bride stepped into view, smoothing the folds of her gown. She wore a look of polite concern that didn't reach the calculating pupils of her green eyes. "Your Grace," she said, still at distance as if unsure of how close she ought to be, "well, we found you unconscious in the courtyard at sunrise. You smelled strongly of wine." Rhaegar snorted softly. He did remember at least how that must look. "I recall some debate. It appears I may have lost." His gaze flicked slowly from Cersei to Joanna. Both women met him with carefully measured expressions. Joanna's lips were set. She drew aside an embroidered curtain that framed a wall of windows. The morning sunlight fell across the lattice of King's Landing's gardens. "You had quite an argument," she said. "You did not fare well, either." Guilt and confusion tangled in Rhaegar's chest. He patted his side gingerly. "My side is bruised, yes, but no broken bones, I think. And my hands," he flexed his fingers, testing the bandages. "They will heal. By the king's justice," Cersei said, stepping closer. Her tone was casual, as if they were discussing the weather and not the health of a prince. "You should return to the capital, Rhaegar. Your father is ill with worry without your return." Rhaegar swallowed. He too felt the old tug of duty. His mind was hazy, but he clung to clarity. He had flown all this way for a reason. He had come to negotiate with Lord Tywin, to propose an alliance of houses against the rebel armies. But now, in this gilded chamber among strangers, the details of that plan felt distant. "How much wine did I drink?" he managed to ask, seeking a plausible explanation for his state. "I seem to have lost a day." "You passed out after the elixir," Joanna said, as if explaining a child's faint. "You will recover quickly, but now, your grace, my lord husband and his guests await you in his chambers. He has something he wishes to discuss." "Something?" Joanna and Cersei exchanged a glance that Rhaegar felt more than saw. He nodded warily. "Council chambers. What could Tywin have to do with a knocked-out prince?" Joanna handed him a glass of cool water. He drank carefully, the liquid soothing a raw throat. "And your proposal?" he asked at length, voice hoarse. Cersei's lips curved. "Tywin will consider your proposal, of course. You have my word, he will listen to you." The words sounded encouraging, but her eyes, they gleamed like emeralds. Rhaegar had learned to read Cersei Lannister's gaze to an extent. It was difficult to tell if her promise was sincere or born of habitual cunning. "But let us not forget that which is yours." Joanna stepped forward then. In one slender movement, she drew from her side a small carved wooden box, elegantly inlaid. She opened it, and warm sunlight spilled across its contents. Rhaegar's breath caught. Inside lay an egg, large and mottled with deep green and red patches, as if a living flame flickered beneath its shell. He reached out for it almost without thinking. It was heavy, just as he remembered, weighty with the hint of life within. Good. He'd feared it lost. All was well, then. "My egg," Rhaegar whispered, awed. He had heard legends of their heartbeats, of how a Targaryen could sense a dragon's life. The moment he cradled it, a peculiar comfort began to warm his chest. "This is it," he thought. He glanced at Cersei. She wore an encouraging smile, though one corner of her mouth twitched as if she were not entirely convinced by her own performance. Joanna, too, inclined her head in what looked like stern approval. "Be careful," Joanna said. "It is, as you know, precious." The nobles had believed Rhaegar noble in purpose. He bowed his head. "Thank you, Lady Joanna. Princess." With politeness he gathered, as he had been taught in all these years of courtly life, he gave a slight bow toward Cersei as well. "For returning my prize to me. You honor me with your loyalty." He felt something shift inside him at the acceptance of the egg. For a moment, he almost believed their intentions were genuinely allied. Had they expected him to refuse it? He could not see how they would lose in returning the egg unto him if that was the case. Neither Cersei nor Joanna let on anything but satisfaction at his gratitude. Grimacing softly, he forced himself to rise and, unwilling to part with his egg a second time, tucked it into a satchel which he quickly slung around his shoulder. With his precious egg secured carefully under one arm, he once more looked to the ladies of Lannister. "Well, then," he said, "let us see what Lord Tywin wishes of me, then." In short order, he was guided to a pavilion where Tywin sat flanked by the rest of his family and lieutenants. No sign of Nathaniel, however. Doubtless he was still away. Tywin, ever stately and imposing in his silvery armor, glanced up as they entered. He nodded curtly to Rhaegar. "Prince Rhaegar," he greeted in his cool Baratheon accented voice. "How fare your injuries?" Rhaegar held his head high, willfully ignoring the bit of dizziness and confusion that clung to him. In truth, he felt embarrassed to be seen as such. Why did it feel as though he'd forgotten something terribly important? Bah, such nonsense. All was well. Paranoia served no one. Well enough. I'll be better soon. My thanks to Lady Joanna, Rhaegar replied formally. Joanna had certainly seen to it well, already the bruises were dulling. These Lannister golds and ambers, at least, heal swiftly. So speaking, he presented Tywin the egg with a flourish. I trust this will suffice as proof of my intent, my lord. The spirit of old Valyria is in my hands now. Tywin's face twitched into a smile that was all sharp angles and sudden pride. He took the egg gingerly, as if it might bite him. Brilliant, he murmured, more to himself than to Rhaegar. Then he swept his gaze up. So, our proposal, he asked. Cersei and Joanna had exchanged a look, as if to remind him silently of what he must deliver. Rhaegar cleared his throat. He's right, I came with a plan. He squared his shoulders. Lord Tywin, he began, I have traveled far to see if House Lannister might yet remember the legacy of Aegon's conquest. The West holds much sway these days. I bring the fire of dragons to your cause. Ally yourselves with me, bind our houses together, and you shan't regret it. Silence hung as Rhaegar detailed all he could recall of his plan, voice steady despite fatigue. Tywin listened without interrupting. Cersei leaned toward Joanna with a small smile, as if evaluating Rhaegar's trust in them. Joanna remained inscrutable. When Rhaegar finally finished, both Lannister women exchanged another glance, and Joanna tipped her head thoughtfully. Lady Joanna's eyes flickered with cunning intelligence. She responded, an intriguing proposal. We will consider it well, Prince Rhaegar. Cersei added, yes, we will give it the thought it deserves. You have our gratitude for showing us this egg. It is a rare thing indeed. Do you believe it will hatch? Rhaegar smiled as he sketched a low bow in Valyrian grace. With all my heart. Joanna wore no such grin, but Cersei's fair lips quirked again as she watched him bow. We appreciate your time. I must take my leave for now, unless you have further. He gestured at the items laid out, maps of ships and battlefields. Need of me. Tywin waved a hand. You have done enough for the moment. We have other matters to attend. By all means, retire at your leisure. Unless, of course, you mean to return to King's Landing. A sudden dizziness overcame Rhaegar just then, causing him to stagger and protectively clutch at his egg. Yes, he muttered. Perhaps that is for the best. I've much to do. Be well, then. In short order and just shy of rudeness, Rhaegar Targaryen found himself dismissed. His mind was left swirling with the conversation, desperately unaware of how deftly Cersei and Joanna had flipped the tables. All he felt was relief to be spared more talk today. He had an egg in hand, after all, and perhaps a future bridge. Satisfaction was fleeting, but anxiety soon gave way to the warmth of triumph. He bowed stiffly once more to Tywin, then took his leave without further question. Outside the hall, he paused a moment to stretch his bruised limbs. They were letting him go. He'd gotten what he wanted. Tomorrow, he would reclaim his composure and sail for home. Perhaps there he could bide his time until father finally fell to the sickness ailing him and begin to make the realm right. Surely he couldn't live much longer. Couldn't he? A nasty little voice whispered in his ear. Spite is a powerful thing. Nonsense. All was well. All was well. He chanted those 3 words like a mantra, repeating them until calm returned. Pride welled inside him as he looked to his egg and the potential promise it entailed. Not even anger at his mysterious mishap sullied the new surge of purpose. He straightened, holding the precious egg tightly but easily, and strode toward out with pride in his stride and did not look back. Disappeared beyond the draped doorway. Tywin waited until the door closed. Only then did he sigh. It worked, then. Joanna quietly inclined her head as if ignoring the words. There he goes with the egg. Cersei smirked, quite pleased with herself. He certainly believes he has won. Tywin leaned forward, expression hard. We'll find out soon enough. Tilda. 3 days later, long after the prince's departure, a very different gathering took place in the waters just outside the stone garden. Just shy of the beach, an enormous creature reared against a splinter of cloud sky. Waves lapped loudly against the stone quay, but this was no mere fish, and all present knew it. Isobu loomed large over them, the 3-tailed sea serpent basking in their way with his uncanny power. He'd long since grown to monstrous scale. His body alone was as long as a war galley, coiling between the pilings, his one good eye burning fiercely in a head crowned with barnacled horns. His 3 great tails, thick as tree trunks, flashed in the air like serpents reborn. Naruto took a certain paternal pride in introducing him to everyone, like a father showing the world his son. Now that Rhaegar was gone, there was little need for secrecy down here on the cliffs. Well, maybe a little secrecy. Wouldn't do to have any spies about. Lord Tywin Lannister stood atop the ancient steps leading down to the water, his great cloak billowing in the salt breeze. Beside him Cersei beamed, idly cradling Matabi. Even Joanna and little Tyrion were present for this spectacle, the latter especially wide-eyed at the sight of a creature straight from his storybooks. As for the Martells, Elia was silent as the grave. Even the ever-flamboyant Oberyn had no words for the sheer spectacle looming before them. Tywin recovered first, naturally, idly craning his neck back to regard Isobu. Quite the beast, and he obeys you. Naruto tutted, not just me. From the shadows near the sea wall emerged a familiar figure in a simple red and gray tunic. She whistled sharply. Isobu reacted instantly, his good eye settling upon her with unmistakable delight. With a sonorous noise and speed that bellied his great bulk, the beast slithered closer. A low chuffing sound came from his throbbing throat, appreciative and contented. He sank slightly lower, allowing the newcomer to mount him easily. With a single leap Nymeria landed atop his head. Her silver-gray hair whipped wildly around her face as she threw an arm around one of Isobu's horns, for balance, grinning all the while. The sea serpent trilled again, a surprisingly gentle sound considering his fearsome bulk, and Nymeria laughed, patting his horn as if patting a great dog. You see, she shouted over the roar of waves. He has his favorite, and that, my lords and ladies, would be me. All right, maybe she was enjoying herself a little too much, there. Still, he couldn't blame her. It had been so long since she'd had someone, besides him to call her own. Here at last, Cersei tutted. That's hardly fair now, is it? She has the largest among us by far. Kurama snorted from where he lay, lounging in the shadows, wings furled. And with an ego to match. Isobu must have heard him, because he rounded on the nine-tailed dragon with a hoot. Not so confident now, are we, Tiny? The latter reared back with an indignant snort, nostrils flaring. Comment on my size again, and I will personally remind you why I'm the eldest. Size matters not, as I'm sure you know, I've more than enough power in this body of mine to smack you back into the sea. Care for a demonstration? Isobu flinched. No, thank you. Naruto bit his lip to stifle a snicker. Some things never changed, despite the lifetimes. Lyanna really was missing out. He had no idea why she insisted upon remaining in her rooms at the Rock. Nymeria, for her part, straightened to face the assembly, blind to the byplay taking place, dark eyes shining with unrestrained glee. And whose fault is that? She said to Cersei, one hand still gripping Isobu's bony horn tight. The great Isobu belongs to me. I have tended him longer than any of you. He is mine by rights. Isobu trilled his agreement, trumpeting his intention to every reborn tailed beast and human present. My human, I'm keeping her. Cersei, never one to be left behind in claiming spoils, wove her arm around Matabi. The two-tailed cat-like dragon reared, irritated by the shouting, and buried her face into Cersei's shoulder for silence. And she belongs to me. She insisted loudly. I have carried her from mile to mile. I was chosen by her before any of you. Matabi is the pride of House Lannister, clearly. Matabi for her part, muffled her sigh into his sister's dress. Such a noisy human I have. A gust of wind carried little plumes of spray from Isobu's flared nostrils as he snickered. Shukaku, the one-tailed tanuki beast currently slinking around Elia's neck, coughed indignantly at the outburst. His single tail coiled around the Martell girl's arm like a living sleeve as she stepped forward beside Cersei in her sun-drenched robe, fixing the latter with a pleased smirk. Well, if we are introducing rightful owners, she said melodically, idly, then that makes this little one mine to rear. I have steadied him and taught him manners, more than any of you. Bitch, please, I tolerate you at best. Www, yeah, right there, scratch my chin. His lips flashed back to reveal small stumpy teeth as he basked in such simple delights before he caught everyone starting at him and rallied. I mean, I ain't yours, in any form, woman. A swirl of sand rose around him as he hissed at her. Speak for yourself, or I'll drown you in a storm of sand. She scratched his chin again, sending him into paroxysms of delight. Isobu let out a deep rumble, bemused as Nymeria clapped him on the head affectionately. Joanna hummed thoughtfully, thumbing her chin. They're certainly a noisy lot. Noisy, they had no idea, if only they could understand them. Matabi screeched softly, expressing her own annoyance. Am I a prize for every vain mistress who tears herself to serve me? Her mismatching gaze swept over Cersei and then at Nymeria, disdainful. I'm quite happy as I am. Two-tailed, thank you, and tethered to none. Either rise above or endure the scorch of my disapproval. Cersei huffed at Elia as the gorgeous night blue cat in her arms frowned. Now, my dear, Cersei cooed, Matabi is far too splendid to belong to you, Nymeria. She is a lady, like me, not some snake of the sands. A baron chuckled richly. Are you going to let that insult slide, sister? Elia granted Cersei an arch look. I think not. Enough. Kurama, who had been content to ignore his bickering siblings until now, roared harshly for silence and stepped forward into the void that followed. He glanced over his shoulder at Matabi, then to Shukaku, and flicked two of his 9 tails out, striking each of them upside the head, thereby forcing a flinch from both. Since when do these melodramas consume us? He snapped at his siblings. We were brought here for war, and we each have a human we prefer, do we not? Whichever mortal claims what seems rather beside the point, if you ask me. Besides. He looked to Isobu and exhaled a thin plume of smoke. Can we not allow each of us even one friend? Naruto ran a hand down his neck. Well said. A low chuckle traveled through the assembly. Even Tywin seemed to relax his stern posture, amusement flickering in his usually cold eyes. It seems you understand them better than most, he added the last bit dryly to favor Kurama with a keen look. Yours in particular appears to have a great deal to say, though I can't understand a word of it. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose. Please don't ask me to translate. For a moment, he almost thought father would. Tywin had never been the sort to believe in magic. Even now, brought face to face with a Leviathan out of legend, he seemed to disdain the very concept. But he wasn't blind to what was going on. He simply accepted it, and moved on. Do they have a preference? He asked, apropos of nothing. Tyrion raised a stubby hand, boy that he was, waving for attention. Can't they just stay here forever? Tywin glared at his younger son. Don't be foolish, boy. Dragons grow quickly. It's a miracle we've managed to keep them contained this long, and the prince nearly put all of that in peril. Sooner or later, we will be forced to move them, if only out of necessity. Kurama replied with a lazy, foxish bow of his head. Ah, the practical wisdom of House Lannister. Tywin quirked a brow. I take it he approves. Naruto shrugged, bemused, in a sense. Shukaku, still poised to flare sand, considered this and promptly decided he enjoyed being the center of attention too much to remain angry. He shuffled around Elia's shoulders once more to make himself comfortable, tucked in his wings and shrugged. If I must belong to anyone, make it Elia of Dorne. A Marcher Lord's blood warms me more than Lannister gold or northern flannel. At this, Elia gave him a triumphant smile, surprising him with her understanding. Seemed her remark about bonding with him rang true. As it should be, my monstrous friend, she drawled. Shukaku takes after the desert, fierce, patient, and better at holding a grudge than the others. Laughing, she patted the beast's head. We'll become fast friends, you and I, you'll see. Shukaku rumbled with what sounded half like acceptance, half like an entire displeased sand dune. Matabi, still nestled in Cersei's arms, purred into the lull. Very well. 2 great voices for 2 greater beasts, she cooed. Let it be known that Matabi stands by Cersei Lannister. I claim only this lady's favor. Cersei grinned triumphantly, hugging Matabi a little tighter. Young Tyrion tilted his head. I don't understand. What did she say? Behind them Isobu gave a great honking roar that echoed off the stone, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a challenge. Nymeria leaned down into Isobu's neck and whispered to him, see how they try to contend with you, my Leviathan. None can fathom your worth. The great serpent's eye half closed in merry content, and he thumped his rightmost tail on the ground with such force that a small tremor rattled the beach. My human is best human. Tywin granted a curt nod to Naruto, much to the latter's chagrin. Well done, Nathaniel, he said. We've been fortunate thus far, due in no small part to your quick thinking. House Lannister thanks you. Naruto offered a modest shrug, careful to keep hold of his emotions. It took every fiber of his being not to laugh at the Three Tails outburst. What can I say? It's a gift. That, or fate. He'd been fortunate thus far, downright lucky, really. Best not to push it. Now if only he could figure out why Lyanna was hiding herself away. Lyanna sulked in her chambers. The reason for this soon became apparent, given what she was holding. She clenched her fists around a single object, a dragon egg, still warm from the sun, and strangely light in her arms. It wasn't fair. She scolded herself with the words again, as she had for days, ever since Nathaniel first entrusted her with his precious treasure. This had been Rhaegar's, but the prince had gone home with a phony, leaving her with. With what, exactly? Was it greedy of her to expect this little one to hatch simply because she wanted it to? Shadow, her direwolf pup, pressed against her leg, sniffing curiously at the egg. He was all dark fur and soft breath, staring at her with bright eyes every so often, as if to ask what he could do. But Lyanna barely saw him. Today, for the first time in a long while, she felt envy twisting in her gut. Joanna Lannister's predictions had been right. The world did rush on without her, it seemed. A dull ache of jealousy burned anew in her throat. She was the one with the direwolf, had been the hardy tomboy of the family, and yet all the gods and men cared about these days were dragons. A dragon hatching on her hands, Lyanna had whispered to herself, thinking how odd that sounded when the truth was about to happen. It was well known that the gift of a dragon's egg was worth any princess's weight in jewels. And she, a Stark girl with first and third sons on her mind, had gotten none. She knew it shouldn't matter, that she shouldn't be fussing over something like this. There were plots to plan, schemes to sway, and things to say. They'd all dodged an arrow with Rhaegar's departure, and while many were quick to celebrate that fact, she couldn't help but feel sullen. Everyone else had themselves a pet or a promise. And me, she thought bitterly, I have a hungry direwolf pup to care for, to be sure, Lyanna muttered under her breath, idly tousling Shadow's fur, but more and more it feels like I'm being left behind. The words tasted sour in her mouth. She bit down on the thought. She was older, stronger than some, but she had no claim to power. No dragon's fire to call her own, no crown, no braid. Nothing. The others celebrated and talked of the coming war, yet here she was, sat in bed, playing with the egg in her hands. The real dragon egg, passed off to her of all people for some kindly reason, while Rhaegar went home with a forgery carved from stone. Nathaniel was a capable faker if nothing else. She still wasn't certain what his aim was there. But now, alone with it, the strange warmth of the egg made her heart beat faster. It felt warm, as if alive. She dared to lay the egg again in her arms, all the fierceness in her heart softening. The comforting weight in her hands had seemed a consolation for being left out of the great fight, a lingering link to Dragonkin, left dormant while the others. Something ugly curdled in her gut like so much sour milk. It wasn't fair. Then, almost without warning, something changed. Rather, everything did. A subtle crackling sound reached her ears, like the fine rustle of silk snagging on stone. Lyanna's breath caught as the shell before her began to fracture. Her fingers spread in shock, once small fissures spreading across the mottled surface. Crack, a crescent line split. She gasped and caught the egg as it gently broke apart. Inside, light glowed, an almost heart-shaped hole formed, then widened, scales the color of smoldering red ember and ash began to stir within the egg. Lyanna's eyes widened. A soft warm glow radiated from the crevice, and through it, she saw a tiny head push out. Long spine's horns emerged, as if the creature had crumbled the egg from within. The entire shell fell away, clattering gently into two halves on the frozen ground. Free at last. Before her in her trembling palms now sat a newborn dragon. It was small, no bigger than her direwolf pup, but its presence was anything but small. Four lithe, muscular tails flicked behind it, adorned with white spines at the tip. Its scales were a rich, ridged maroon along its spine, fading to gray on its rounded belly. Each ridge felt hot to Lyanna's trembling fingers, though even now steam curled from its muzzle like a forge in winter. It had two slender, curved horns jutting from its forehead, sharp as daggers. She clutched the sides of its tiny head in wonder, careful at first, then stroking its crest. The hatchling's almond-colored eyes blinked against the sunlight and then fixed on Lyanna. For a heartbeat she held his gaze, they each seemed to measure the other. I'm terribly sorry, Lyanna found her voice shaking. I didn't think you'd hatch for me. I'd never even had the chance to. The little dragon's head craned with curious grace to glare at her. Its golden, cat-like eyes narrowed thoughtfully, amber pupils narrowing as it studied the young Stark girl and her direwolf at their feet. Then it gave a soft chirp, a sound oddly intelligent, as if it were considering words. And then, to her great delight, a humble human, how rare. Lyanna swallowed, and her heart thumped in her ears. Did it just? Do you understand me, child? The words were clear, spoken in a deep, echoing voice that did not fit its diminutive frame. Lyanna's skin prickled. The dragon was speaking to her, as though long ago trained in some courtly tongue. It tilted its head, nostrils flaring gently. Lyanna leaned back, eyes round with shock. You speak. The hatchling stretched a clawed foot and lightly scratched at its ear bone. Speak, only to the one who freed me, it replied, voice gentle but amused. Of course I speak. Do you think me a mindless beast? No, I am Yonbi, Son Goku, once lost to time, now reborn. It craned its neck, considering its surroundings with a keen eye. And if I'm here, then that whelp must be nearby. Where is he, then? And while we're at it, who might you be? A burst of warmth flooded Lyanna's face. Yonbi, Son Goku. It named itself, though the latter was a strange name indeed. It clearly remembered something of an ancient identity, even as a four-tailed baby dragon. Lyanna, she said softly, instinctively giving it a name, even though he had told her already. I am Lyanna. Ah, that makes sense then, doesn't it? The Yonbi shifted on its haunches, the sound of claws on cloth as Lyanna unconsciously let her direwolf puppy lap at her boots. Stark blood, then, a dragon of ice and fire, it observed with a curious softness. It licked its talon thoughtfully. I have a destiny, I think. Or at least, a chance to be more than sand and fate. I would speak to you of that, if you will. Lyanna felt tears spring unbidden. She laughed in astonishment and delight, a crystalline sound on the cold air. You are a dragon, she whispered, incredulous. A real dragon, and you speak as if you were human. Yes, Yonbi answered, peering up with solemn eyes, tails swaying lazily. Dragons are born cunning, though my last life wasn't much different. Many have feared me, though not without reason. He huffed once and sneezed. Blast this small form, I don't remember everything, but you're a sore sight better than that pompous prince. The beast reborn huffed at the mere mention of Rhaegar and peered at her anew. You handled my egg so gently, whereas he kept jostling me around as though I were some child's toy. Lyanna stifled an incredulous giggle and reached out to brush a finger against the dragon's cheek. It was warm, and despite its tiny size, she could feel a steady heartbeat within it. I'm terribly sorry about that, she said by way of apology. It must have been terrible. It was. The Yonbi flared his wings with what was meant to be a thunderous roar, but emerged as an indignant squawk of a chirpy baby dragon. You've no idea how insufferably annoying he was. Always going on about fate this and destiny that. Don't get me started on his ancestors. Honestly, bloody Targaryens, they're worse than the Uchiha. Always jabbering on about fire and blood and glory. Bah. Lyanna tilted her head, not quite comprehending the last word. Pray tell, what is an Uchiha? Never you mind that. The Yonbi waved a wing her way. I'm sure Naruto will have plenty to tell you. Honestly, I'm surprised he hasn't already, given he's your husband. She sputtered, secretly pleased despite herself. We aren't wed. Son tilted his head. No, his scent is all over you. Her face reddened. There's a perfectly good reason for that. Was it possible for a dragon to smirk? Maybe, because it felt like the Yonbi was smirking. Flustered, she barreled on before he could embarrass her further. Ever since Rhaegar came to Castle Rock, I've felt strange since, like something was missing. It only grew worse once I held your egg. Yonbi swiveled his head and snarled playfully at his own tail. That would be me, he replied. That was me forcing the shell open. I knew it was you. The warmth of your heart, Stark girl, has a curious song. Lyanna laughed again, leaned back against the headboard of her back, her direwolf nuzzling her hand happily. Oh gods, this is real, she whispered. She looked up at the dragon on her lap, marveling anew. This is really me, I have a dragon. Yonbi's golden eyes sparkled. A dragon, a queen's friend, a whisperer of storms, he declared dramatically. We have much to learn of each other, Lyanna of House Stark. He extended one tiny wing, briefly blotting her vision with a shadow as he flapped it. But know this, of all the humans who laid eyes on me, you are the one who saved me. Lyanna reached up and rested her palm on the soft velvet behind Yonbi's ear horn. The dragon leaned into her touch. For a long moment, all her fears and concerns were forgotten. Here was fire, and ice, power in the small beating chest under her palm. Here was belonging, for she felt left out no longer. Nathaniel's going to panic when he sees you. Is that the name he goes by these days? How amusing. Chuckling, the Yonbi spoke again, clear and calm. Together we shall forge a destiny, child of the north. Lyanna's eyes brimmed with shock and elation. Perhaps she laughed, perhaps she cried. It was impossible to tell which joy overcame the other as she buried her face in Yonbi's scaly neck. In that instant, she felt anything was possible. No longer was she merely Lyanna Stark, forgot among those with dragons. She was Lyanna Stark, future dragonrider of the four-tailed Yonbi. The tiny dragon chirped and shifted, draping all four shimmering tails around her arm like a ferocious, protective cloak. At her side, her direwolf pup let out a happy yip, tail wagging. At least Little Shadow knew better than to mess with a dragon. Lyanna held onto her new ally and friend as the last light of day painted the sky pink. Said hatchling squinted at her, chirped once, curled up in her hands and apparently mollified, began to fall asleep. Without warning, the door swept open. Lyanna, there you are. Naruto paused on the threshold, just shy of entering, one hand on the door. He saw the Yonbi nuzzled against her. Blinked once, rubbed his eyes. Blinked again now, in utter disbelief. What in the seven hells happened while I was gone? Said Yonbi squawked at him, wings flaring as he chirped indignantly. There you are, took your sweet time, didn't you? I've been waiting. Lyanna balked, struggled to answer, to explain herself, what she'd just experienced, all for naught. She managed only an anxious chuckle. Nathaniel opened his mouth, closed it, tried to rally, and failed. At length, he pinched the bridge of his nose with a hearty sigh. I have several questions. In the end, Lyanna simply couldn't help herself. The dam of her heart broke. She laughed, hysterically, hopelessly, happily. Surprise! Aerys screamed in his dreams. The Iron Throne was melting beneath him in a torrent of emerald flame. Shadows capered in the conflagration, dark shapes of traitors and demons that laughed at his agony. In the dream, he tried to rise, to flee the burning throne room, but his ruined legs failed him. A familiar cruel laughter echoed all around as wildfire surged higher, unbearably hot. The king's silvery hair sizzled and the smell of burnt flesh choked him. He heard a whisper, his own voice, or someone else's, his treason in his ear, followed by another peal of mad laughter. Worse, from within the flames, he glimpsed a tall figure with glowing eyes stretched out a hand as if to snatch the crown from his very head. The king opened his mouth to curse the usurper, but only a scream came out. And still the laughter grew louder until it drowned out the crackle of fire. He jolted awake with a gasp, cold sweat clinging to his skin. Silk bed curtains, not flames, surrounded him now. But the echo of that laughter still rang in his ears. Aerys's heart galloped in his chest like a frantic colt as he blinked at the dark bedchamber. It was the middle of the night in Maegor's holdfast. Only a few candles guttered, their light stretching monstrous shadows on the walls. For a moment he thought one of those shadows moved and laughed. Aerys clutched at the coverlet, nails scratching the fabric. Who's there? He croaked. His voice came out reedy and ragged. There was no answer, only the distant pop of dying embers in the hearth. With great effort, Aerys pushed himself upright against his pillows. Pain stabbed through his twisted back and pock-marked flesh, a constant reminder of the many maladies that haunted him. He bared his teeth and endured it, squinting with his good eye, searching for assassins in the gloom, afraid the very shadows might come to life and seek to strangle him. 2 years. 2 bloody years had passed since the illness that left him crippled, yet his fury burned as hot as ever. He knew he was but a shadow of his former self, down an arm and a leg and likely to lose the latter. Pycelle said his royal member all but rotted off, his very flesh fevered and sore. They thought him weak now, these vipers in his court, even his own wife, who looked lovelier every day. But he was still their king, still the dragon. His remaining hand groped at his bedside table until it closed on a small silver bell. He shook it furiously, the clang echoing beyond his chamber. In seconds, the door burst open and a member of the Kingsguard hurried in. Sir Jaime Lannister's golden armor gleamed in the candlelight as he knelt. Your Grace. Aerys's violet eyes narrowed to slits. Even in darkness, Jaime's youth and beauty were an offense. Tywin's golden son, he thought with a flare of hatred, planted here to watch me. Get out, Aerys spat, before the Kingsguard could speak another word. Jaime froze, uncertainty gleaming in his green eyes. The king's lips twitched. Deaf, are you? Begone, I said, he rasped, coughing harshly. Unless you mean to cut my throat while I sleep, Lannister. Jaime stiffened as if struck and rose to his feet. I would never. Aerys hurled the silver bell at Jaime's head. Out. The knight ducked back through the door just in time. The bell clanged off the wooden doorframe and onto the floor. In the hallway, Aerys heard another Kingsguard murmur something to Jaime, quieting him, perhaps. Good. Let them whisper. Let them all tremble at the Mad King's wrath. He sank back into his mattress, chest heaving. His skin felt clammy under his bedgown, and he realized the sheets were damp with sweat. That dream. Every night it was the same. fire, betrayal, mocking laughter. Some nights he swore a demon with 6 fox-like whiskers haunted him, leering from the edges of the flames. Other nights he saw his son standing among the traitors, a woman's shape standing at Rhaegar's side as they laughed together at his downfall. Waking brought no relief. The images clung to him like leeches, sapping what little strength he had left. Aerys closed his eyes, willing his racing heart to slow. They think to unmake me with nightmares, he brooded. Witches, sorcerers, perhaps Raella's doing, or that foreign bitch of Rhaegar's. Oh, yes, he knew what that fool boy was up to. Aerys knew his son had been despairing of finding a bride as of late. They'd all fled to the Lannisters, no doubt. Tywin, Aerys thought, stomach twisting with old bitterness at the thought of his oft-absent hand. It always came back to Tywin. Even with Lord Lannister gone from King's Landing these 2 years, he could feel his silent shadow looming. Tywin's spawn were everywhere, his son in the Kingsguard, his spies undoubtedly under every rock. Perhaps it was Tywin behind these tormenting dreams, trying to drive him to madness or death. I'll show them, the king whispered to himself, voice shaking. I am still of the dragon's line. I will have all their heads for this. His cracked lips peeled into a grin at the thought of traitors burning. He imagined Tywin's green eyes melting in their sockets, and a low giggle bubbled up from Aerys's throat. Perhaps an example needed to be made, if not of Tywin quite yet, then another. Those fools down in Duskendale were refusing to pay their taxes, begging for a new charter. Dennis Darklyn had sent a great many ravens himself as of late, entreating his presence, wishing to meet with him. Ought he go in person? Tywin would tell him not to go, but bah, what use had he for an oft-absent hand? He'd all but dismissed him in name, anyway. The man was rarely in the capital anymore, always claiming to be away on matters of the realm. Ah, but Aerys knew the truth. Tywin couldn't bear to see his former heir wearing the armor of the Kingsguard, to know that Jaime had been forever plucked from his grasp. For his part, the king was all too happy to make his former friend suffer by using his son as a shield. Let him stew in the rock, far from here. He was the king, he did as he pleased. He needed not Tywin's permission. The lion did not command the dragon. He would pay for his transgressions in time. Yes, yes, he would make them all pay in the end. In the hallway, the Kingsguard resumed their watch, exchanging uneasy glances as the sound of the Mad King's thin laughter seeped under the door. Tilda. Queen Raella watched the dawn light creep into her chambers, turning the dust motes to gold. She sat at her vanity, brushing out her long silver hair. Each stroke of the brush was slow and deliberate, a calming ritual. These mornings were the only moments she had to herself, when her husband still slept, or more likely, ranted to himself in his locked chambers and the burdens of the day had yet to descend. She set the brush down and regarded her reflection. By all rights she ought to look haggard. She was past her 40th year, and the last 2 years had been full of strain and sorrow. And yet, her skin was smooth, almost dewy with health, and there was a bloom to her cheeks she hadn't seen since girlhood. She ran a fingertip across her face, marveling at the absence of lines and the youthful glow in her violet eyes. Rejuvenated, the court gossips whispered of her. Some even dared call it sorcery. If only they knew the true reason. Raella's lips curved into a secret smile. She knew exactly whom she had to thank for this miracle. Naruto, or rather, Nathaniel as he was known to most. But in the privacy of her heart she preferred his true name. 2 years ago, that golden-haired young man had touched her life like a comet lighting up a night sky. She remembered his warmth, his strange power washing over her in healing waves. Bruises and aches long endured had vanished under his hands. More than that, he'd been a friend when she'd had none. A friend, and perhaps more, when fate was kinder. Her hands clasped together atop the vanity, remembering how he'd last squeezed them in farewell during their most recent dream. He had promised they would meet in the flesh. Every day since, the queen had lived in quiet hope of that reunion. That day was coming soon. She could feel it, sure as her heart beating beneath her breast. A knock at her door drew Raella from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, rising to her feet. One of her ladies peeked in. "Your Grace, the prince is here to see you." No sooner had she spoken than Rhaegar slipped past her into the chamber, all smiles. "Mother," he said warmly, spreading his arms wide. "You look lovely as ever, younger by the day." If only he knew. The lady-in-waiting withdrew, closing the door to give them privacy, and once more, she was forced to wear a mask. Rhaegar. Raella hesitated only for a moment before crossing the room to enfold her son into an embrace. He was garbed informally, in a simple black doublet with the three-headed dragon of Targaryen embroidered on the breast. Though he was a young man in that moment, he looked more a boy, leaning into his mother's hug. She stroked a strand of his silver hair, then pulled back to study him. "You look tired," she murmured. Indeed, there were faint shadows under Rhaegar's eyes. "Are you well?" Rhaegar managed a wan smile. "Dreams." He left it at that, but Raella felt a chill despite her dislike of him. Ah, the dreams again. She did not love her son, but neither could she bring herself to truly hate him. "Dark dreams?" she asked gently, gaining a nod from him. For a moment they shared a haunted look. Raella knew only too well how cruel Targaryen dreams could be. She guided Rhaegar to sit by the window, where the sun now glinted off the red roofs of King's Landing. As they settled on a cushioned bench, she caught him stealing a curious glance at her face. "What is it?" she wondered. Rhaegar's smile reached his eyes this time. "You truly seem, well, mother, more than well, radiant." A compliment, but there was a question in it too. Raella flushed lightly. Did he suspect something? "Perhaps I've simply found more time for sleep and prayer." It wasn't exactly a lie. Prayer was one of her few solaces when awake. But her son's perceptive look told her he wasn't entirely convinced. Thankfully, he let it pass. Rhaegar took her hand, turning it palm up in his. He frowned at the faint white scar that ran across her wrist. "A relic of one of Aerys's cruelties years ago. Has father troubled you lately?" he asked quietly. As though he could, with only one arm and a leg. A vindictive smile nearly shattered Raella's facade then and there. It took a substantial effort on her part to keep it from breaking through. Deprived of both poise and his pecker, the only abuse her husband could hurl her way was verbal. Oh, he could have his Kingsguard beat her when truly roused, but he'd not yet realized that. She suspected Aerys would have a riot on his hands if he tried. Esser Barristat and Esser Gwaine might obey the order, but Esser Jaime and Esser Arthur would never, and such a rebellion would split the Kingsguard down the middle with the rest. "Mother." But Rhaegar was asking her a question and she must attend. "No." Raella squeezed his fingers. "He leaves me be." In truth, Aerys had not touched her for years, now. The narrow scratches that encircled her throat hidden by the high collar of her gown bore witness to her husband's final pitiful attempt to harm her. She banished the memory with a shiver. "Do not fret over me, Rhaegar. What of you? How goes the realm?" Her son sighed and released her hand. "The realm is quiet, for now. Tense, but quiet. We've had no open war." He paused. "Father's health. Well, you know as well as I he refuses to be seen in his chair, so Lord Carleton speaks all commands for him." Raella pressed her lips together. The king insisted on ruling despite his declining health, issuing edicts from behind closed doors. It was an untenable situation. Perhaps it would be a mercy once the Lannisters finally killed him. "And you, Rhaegar?" she asked softly, choosing not to think of that day. "You've borne much yourself." Indeed, her son's hopes of marriage seemed to grow slimmer by the year. The death of little Viserys had shaken them all, but her son had suffered setback after setback as of late, countless disappointments, be it both in courtship and health. He'd been downright despondent when his egg refused to hatch. It never would, of course. Naruto had replaced the true article with a convincing fake carved from stone. As far as tricks went, that was a wicked one. She had laughed for the better part of 5 minutes when he'd revealed the truth in her dreams. But now Rhaegar's expression turned distant. He gazed out over the waking city. "I have been thinking on how to restore what was lost," he said, muttering softly to himself. "Not just the realm's unity, but something more." He hesitated, choosing his words wisely. "The people need something to inspire them again. To believe in. I need." From there he trailed off entirely, eyes unfocusing as if seeing something, or someone, far away. Raella's heart quickened. There was a note in his voice she hadn't heard in years. Almost a yearning. "Is it Elia Martell you speak of?" she ventured. "Do you intend to court her?" "Dorne would never allow it." "No, not Elia." Rhaegar glanced at his mother, and a small secretive smile curled his lips. It reminded Raella of how he'd looked as a boy, reading of ancient heroes and their loves. "I have someone else in mind. I can't say more yet. But soon, perhaps." A new love. Raella's stomach knotted with worry. Who could it be? He gave away so little, but she knew Rhaegar's cryptic moods. Was there a lady in his life he had kept hidden? In the past 2 years he had scant time for courtship, consumed by negotiation and smoothing over the wounds made Aerys, madness. And yet, Raella recalled a certain incident. The tourney of storms ended during last year, where Rhaegar had been uncharacteristically distracted. He had even withdrawn from the lists early. Rumors whispered he'd been seen talking to the daughter of some lord there, who, they knew not. Knowledge was power, and the lack thereof of not knowing what her son was scheming was alarming indeed. "I pray you'll be careful," she said quietly, laying a hand on Rhaegar's knee. "Whoever this woman is, the realm is a tinderbox just now. One spark could set it afire." Rhaegar covered her hand with his own. "I know, I have no wish to ignite another war. Quite the opposite." He offered her a reassuring smile. "I believe this path could bring peace, mother. A dragon has 3 heads, after all," he added mysteriously. "The Targaryen line needs children, and quickly. If I must stoop to desperate measure on that front, then so be it." Raella's eyes widened a fraction. Was he implying what she thought? Before she could respond, Rhaegar stood and straightened his doublet. "In a year's time, there will be a great tourney at Harrenhal," he announced, as if declaring royal policy. "All the great lords are invited. It will be the largest tournament in living memory." "Harrenhal," Raella murmured. "That cursed, gargantuan castle in the Riverlands. The place Aerys himself had last ridden forth, years ago, only to be humiliated." She could only imagine how the king had reacted when told of this plan. "Your father agreed to this?" "He did." Rhaegar's mouth twisted. "In a fashion. Lord Went is ostensibly our host. But I pushed for it." He paced to the window, gazing out at the hazy sky. "It will be a chance for alliances to be forged anew. And perhaps for me to court the favor of certain people." Certain people, certain ladies. Oh, gods. Who was he after? Not Elia, and he hadn't mentioned Lyanna Starr in a fortnight. Cersei had all but rebuffed him in silence. Who, then, did that leave? Surely not the Tully girl. Brandon Starr.